Okay, today's Dal Kislev. So the topic is obviously the Rebbe's anniversary. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzins, Achei Temimim, wedding anniversary. I'm hoping next week I'll be able to do Yutas Kislev. It'll be after Yutas Kislev, but that's the way it goes. Today we'll do Dal Kislev, and B'lineder next week we'll do Yutas Kislev. Post facto, in anticipation of the Hanukkah vacation. How do I tell the story of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins' wedding? Right? Once upon a time, there was a Rebbe and there was a Rebbetzin, and they got married. That's the story. I suppose the beginning of the story goes back a few generations. Tzemach Tzedek was a great Rebbe. The third Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose name the Rebbe had. The Rebbe's father, Rabbi Yossi, always used to write to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin that the two of you have the same name as the two of them. He writes to his father, Rebbe Levik writes to his son, the Rebbe's August son, our Rebbe, Sha'ata v'chaveroscha nikroim b'shmam shel Tzemach Tzedek v'chaveroscha. You and your friend, that's how he refers to her, carry the same name as the Tzemach Tzedek and his chavra, and his friend. The same name is Menachem Mendel and Chaya Mushka. Tzemach Tzedek was an incredibly great Rebbe. Unfortunately, there's an event that happened when he passed away that's... it's very unfortunate. From a historical point of view, when you look at it objectively now, you say, what a waste. It was a terrible, terrible waste. What happened was that Lubavitch was split. You know, like in every Chassidish movement today, you know, a Rebbe passes away, and then depending on how many children he has, that's how many new Rebbes there are. That's what happened. Tzemach Tzedek was nostalgic, and there were four Mamala Makayim, four successors. There were the fifth. But first of all, he became a Rebbe when Tzemach Tzedek was still alive. And second of all, he didn't become a Chabad Rebbe, he became a Polish Rebbe. He took on a whole different style. But the Tzemach Tzedek's Istalkus ushered in a division of Lubavitch, of Chabad, which would last more or less 50 years, maybe a little less. 50 years, from the 1860s until the First World War, approximately. There were four branches of Chabad. The largest branch was Kapust, not Lubavitch. The smallest branch was Lubavitch. The second largest branch was lyhadus. The third largest branch was Nezhin, and the last was Lubavitch. In Nezhin, there was only one generation. The Nezhin Rebbe passed away. His name was Rebbe Nezhin. When he passed away, there was no successor. His son did not become a Rebbe after him. In fact, his son was the father of the Rebbetzins in the Chamadina. The Frierdick Rebbe Shver was the son of the Nezhin Rebbe. But the other three were two generations, the son and the grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek. And the tzaris that the Jewish people encountered in Russia during this period were very bad. The only thing that you could say good about the tzaris that happened in the 1860s and the 1870s and the 1880s and the 1890s, that compared to the tzaris that would come the next generation, they paled and they were not a big deal. It's a lot of tzaris, and the split of Lubavitch didn't help. In other words, had Lubavitch remained unified, I mean, how could that have happened? If that would have happened, there would have been a different Eibishter and a different universe, and there's only one Eibishter, there's only one world, there's only one Teid, and there's only one Ratzon. What is what's supposed to be, whether we approve of it or not. But the fact was, Lubavitch was divided. And the result of the division was that each one of the four groups was weaker. You know, anytime you have an army, and you divide your forces into four, each quarter is weaker than they would be if they were joined with the other three. This is the risks you take when you divide your army, you divide your forces, and that's what happened. The truth of the matter is, Lubavitch should have been divided into five. It should have been divided into five. Why five? Because there were five sons. Tzemach Tzedek had seven. One, I already told you, became a Polish Rebbe. This is our Frierdick Rebbe's mother's father. His name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok. The Frierdick Rebbe is named after him. One passed away before the Tzemach Tzedek. His name was Rabbi Yankiv. He was a Rav in Aral. We don't know much about him. He was a Choshev Erid, but he wasn't in the Madreg of the other brothers. Okay, four became Rebbes, and one didn't. Which one didn't become Rebbe? The one who was entitled to the position, the oldest. So the Machon was a Bechor. He was the firstborn. And Al Pi Halacha, a Bechor is entitled to be Memala Mekayim Avesav if he's Roy. That's a din. If a king passes away, or a king Gadol passes away, or anybody passes away, if his oldest son is Roy, he's Memala Mekayim. Ravash was entitled, the Baruch Shalom, that's our grandfather, his grandfather was entitled to be Memala Mekayim Aviv, from a halachic perspective, and on and on and on. He was an Adam Gadol, he was Adam Kaddish. It's very interesting. Tzemach Tzedek had a lot of trouble in his own house. Why? He became a Rebbe. One of his children was still a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. Another one of his children remained a chassid of the Middle Rebbe. That's how it was. The Ravash knew the Alter Rebbe. He was 7 when the Alter Rebbe passed away. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says his entire life he was sad. His entire life he was sad. Because he never got over the loss of his great-grandfather. The Alter Rebbe was very, very close to his great-grandson, the Ravash. He taught him things that he didn't teach anybody else. And he had a very special relationship with him. The Ravash was there because the Alter Rebbe's Petira. The Ravash was one of the few people involved in the Alter Rebbe's... Remember, the Alter Rebbe was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Hadich. The Mishpacha was in Piene. The Alter Rebbe's Levaya probably didn't even have a minyan. It was done away. They took the Alter Rebbe's Guf Kaddish. 3 people went. The Tzemach Tzedek, and Reb Nachum, and the Ravash. Tzemach Nachum was Tzemach Tzedek's brother-in-law, and the Rebbe Shom. The Middle Rebbe wasn't around. The Middle Rebbe had gone away, as I told you the story the other day. So Ravash was the oldest. And he was very connected still to the Alter Rebbe. He was entitled to be B'Malam Makayim Avav, and he wasn't. I'll get back to him in a moment. And the Ma'aril, Yehuda Leib, he was the second. He was a chassid of the Middle Rebbe's. For 15 years after the Middle Rebbe passed away, he remained a chassid of the Middle Rebbe's until something happened and he saw his father's Mesiras Nefesh. So he became a chassid of his own father. I told you the story. I think I told you the story. Tzemach Tzedek came back from Peterburg. He said, you have to make a special dinner. I brought a new chassid from Peterburg. Who was the chassid? His own son, after 15 years. Now the Ravash should have been a Rebbe. Why wasn't he? Because the Tzemach Tzedek asked him not to. Tzemach Tzedek made his Mamal HaMokim his youngest son. Tzemach Tzedek made his successor the Rebbe Marash. He wrote a tzavor. And this made people crazy, because the Rebbe Marash was so much younger than his brothers. The Rebbe Marash has nephews and nieces older than him. Many. He was a young man, he was 32 years old. His brothers were in their 50s and 60s. And the Tzemach Tzedek wrote in his tzavor that the Marash was Malam Makayim. And there was all kinds of stuff. There was what they call politics. I've never heard of politics. I mean, we don't know what that means, but in the olden days, they used to have politics. And the Marash became a Rebbe in Lubavitch, and he had the smallest olam, the smallest crowd. Unfortunately. The Ravash was entitled to be a Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek said to him, don't be a Rebbe. Please, I'm asking, don't be a Rebbe. And then he added some cryptic words, some riddle, some hint. He said, if you're not going to be a Rebbe, you'll get Pishnayim Beruch. The halacha is that a firstborn gets Pishnayim, gets double, or you divide, a man passes away. And he leaves 5 children, 5 sons, yeah? You divide the estate into 6 parts, not into 5 parts. And the Bechar gets 2 parts. Pishnayim Bechar Sheimotzei Lei. So Tzemach Tzedek told the Ravash, if you're not going to take Rabbist for now, you'll get your Pishnayim. You'll get your double. But you're going to have to wait 4 generations. He quoted a pasuk in Pashas Lech Lecha, V'dei Revi Yeshuvu Heinin. 4 generations it will come back to you. So what happened was, Tzemach Tzedek passes away. The Lubavitch was divided up into 4, but those generations only lasted 2 dairis. One of them was 4 Rebbes, but 3 of them were brothers. Only 2 generations. And the only thing that was left was Lubavitch. There was the Rebbe Marash, there was the Rebbe Rashab, and there was the Frierdiker Rebbe. The grandchildren of the Ravash knew this. Rebbe Leivik, the Rebbe's father and his grandfather, knew this Messiah was passed along in their family from generation to generation, that in 4 generations it come back to them and they're going to get double. The day Revi'u in the 4th generation it'll come back to you. So the Shmua is, there's a lot of things that people say that are hard to prove and ascertain. And then there's some things that people say that are a little bit uncomfortable. Rebbe Leivik felt there should be a Rebbe. Why? He was the 4th generation from Tzemach Tzedek. Rebbe Baruch Shalom, Levi Yitzchak, Rebbe Baruch Shneir, and then Rebbe Leivik. When that didn't happen, the Leivik did not become a Rebbe because the Chassidim didn't follow him, they followed the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe became a Chassan from Frierdiker Rebbe, so the Rebbe Leivik said he made a mistake. That when the Tzemach Tzedek said 4 generations, he didn't mean 4 generations from the Tzemach Tzedek, he meant 4 generations from the Ravash. Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, Baruch Shneir, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, and then the Rebbe. And Rebbe Leivik, this is a fact, always talked about his son as the next Rebbe. And Chassidim wanted to lynch him. Because every Chassid believes that the Rebbe is Mashiach. A Rebbe lives forever. And Rebbe Leivik would say, Pemale! Ich bin der Mechutner von der Babetschen Rebbe, I'm the Mechutner of the Rebbe, und mein Sohn wird sein dem kommenden Rebbe, my son is the next Rebbe, and it was bad. Rebbe Leivik was not afraid of anybody, and he said exactly what he thought. And many anash had that experience where they would meet him and he would tell them straight, "Ich bin the Machon, and my son is next." Go ahead.
You know, a lot of, I always heard this, I don't know, maybe it's not from a true source, that the Rebbe's father was very opposed to him.
I don't know if very opposed is the right word. There were complications in the shidduch. I'm going to maybe get to it a little bit. Nobody knows for sure, or nobody wants to say for sure. I've heard some very interesting things, some of which I'm comfortable repeating, and some of which I'm not comfortable repeating. But yeah, there was something. It wasn't pashut. The rumor is, this apparently is the truth, is that Rebbe Leivik knew that they would not have children. But there's more pratim, there's more details, which are a little bit harder to understand, which I'm not going to repeat. I'm just not repeating it. I've heard more rumors than I'm prepared to share. So that's the beginning of the story. In the family of the Rebbe's father, there was this knowledge that the Rebbe is going to come from them after 4 generations. Now, fast forward. The Rebbe was born, Yud Aleph Nisan Tov Reish Tamach Beis, right? Our Rebbe was born the 11th day of Nisan in 1902. This was the golden age of Lubavitch. Why? The other Chassidus now began to wane. Kappas was not what it was. Liadi was still very strong. Nezhin was already over. And Lubavitch had this huge resurgence. And how many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Yisrael Nech? There's Zaydas for Nezhin Echsidim. How many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Chaim Shnei Zalman? There's Zaydas for Liadi Echsidim. How many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Yehuda Leib? There's Zaydas for Kappas Techsidim. In other words, when the Rebbe Rashab made Achei Temimim, everything went down into the same drain. All the other Chabadniks, there was take division with politic of idiots they weren't. They sent their children to learn on Lubavitch. And Achei Temimim brought the Tzemach Tzedek's Lubavitch back together, whatever was left of it. There was a lot of tzaras and a lot of halamas v'esteinim, but nevertheless, Achei Temimim brought it back together, brought back the chavila, the tzroir, the pekel, the package of Lubavitch back together. The Rebbe was born Tafresh Amach Beis. If the Rebbe had come to Achei Temimim as a 12-year-old, he would have been ahead of anybody else. As a 13-year-old, the Rebbe was never in Lubavitch. He never stepped foot in the city of Lubavitch. Ad kedei kach, I heard this from Rabbi Groner, myself. I think I have a tape of it. That when the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe asked they should make him a stationary. The Rebbe used to use the stationery of the different moistus, Machon, Americans, and Kos. Used the station, the feed the Rebbe gave him. But the morning after, Yud Shvat was Wednesday night. Thursday morning, the Rebbe comes into the 770 and with a smile says, "Nu, Taftach Machon, Anai, and Blanc, if they make a new stationery." So they told the Rebbe, "What do you want on the stationery?" The Rebbe says, "You'll prepare it and I'll fix it." So what did they do? They took the Frierdiker Rebbe stationery and they changed the name. Grand Rabbi, Ein Kleinigkeit. But by the time the Rebbe was done with it, there was nothing left of the original. And one of the things was, the Rebbe said, you can't put the word Lubavitch on it. Lubavitch. And can you imagine a Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't put in the stationery the word Lubavitch? And the Maskirim were really disturbed. So in the beginning, the Pshara was, it didn't say Mi Lubavitch, it said Lubavitch. Not from Lubavitch, but the word Lubavitch was left on the stationery. The Rebbe station doesn't even say Rebbe, it just says his name. So this is his name. Then the Rebbe made them do all the work, and then he undid everything that they did. And so you live the Rebbe's name and the phone number and the address of 770 Mergonisht. The Rebbe wanted to take out the word Lubavitch. He said, I heard this from Rabbi Groner myself, ich became Lubavitch. So he said, but how could you have a Lubavitcher Rebbe? It was not a Lubavitcher. So they put the word Lubavitch back, they just took out the Bim. It was not me Lubavitch. And the question becomes, why didn't the Rebbe go to Lubavitch? It doesn't make any sense. He was 18 years old when the Rebbe Rashab passed away. 18. The Rebbe's father said about the Rebbe to Rebbetzin Chana, who repeated it, Tzuba mitzvah is a given a go noilum. The Rebbe at Bar Mitzvah was a go noilum. So at 18 years old, the Rebbe had a lot to take from the Rebbe Rashab, had a lot to get from Lubavitch. And he never was in Lubavitch. So there's a sefer called Yemei Melech. The Yemei Melech is a book of stories that could have happened. That's the way it's labeled nowadays. It's not the book that happened, but could have happened. There are many, many stories of the Rebbe. Every single story in the Yemei Melech has a source. The problem is how reliable the sources are. It came out around 30 years ago. It came out before, I think before Chav Zayin Oder. I read it cover to cover. I ate it up. It's an Amoid in the Kesefer. So there's a story in the Sefer Yimei Melech that somebody asked the Rebbe's mother. All three boys were geniuses, all three of them. Mendel Battle Label, Mebel, Mem Beis Lamed. Mebel means furniture, Sheina Mebel. Mendel Battle Label, they're all geniuses. None of them saw the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe was the oldest. So they said to Rebbetzin Chane, they're such gifted children, you don't send them to Lubavitch. So the Rebbetzin Chane said, he's tearing to go, he's desperate to go, they're not letting him. Now who's they? Who's not letting the Rebbe go to Lubavitch? Malach Machon, Malach Gabriel, the Samach Mem. Who's stopping? What? The Kaiser, the King, the Tsar, Nikolai. Who's stopping the Rebbe from going to Lubavitch? There's only one of two possibilities. The Rebbe Rashab himself, or the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father was Chassid numero uno of the Rebbe Rashab. The Dveikas, the Iskashas from the Rebbe Levik and the Rebbe Rashab is famous. The Rebbe spoke about it. So why would the Rebbe not be allowed to go to Lubavitch? Why? Now, nobody knows the answer to that question. But there is a precedent for this. The Alter Rebbe was 15 when the Baal Shem Tov passed away. His father was a chassid, his mother was a chassid, his grandfather was a chassid, his uncle was a chassid, his aunt was a chassid, his teachers were chassidim. And they were all sworn to secrecy. Not only were they not allowed to talk about the Baal Shem Tov, they were not allowed to say the word Baal Shem in the Alter Rebbe's presence. Alter Rebbe never heard the name Baal Shem Tov. Never. He was 15. Shabbos Talkus was a couple months before his chasana. The Alter Rebbe never heard the name Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. As the 3-year-old, the Baal Shem Tov gave him a haircut, and they drayed him a cup until they told him it is Azayde. But the Alter Rebbe was prevented from being the Baal Shem Tov. And the Frierdiker Rebbe tells the story in his Rishimis that the Baal Shem Tov called in the Mezitcher Magid. And he said to the Mezitcher Magid, you should know that there's a Neshama Chadash on this world, there's a new soul on this world. And he told him the whole story about how this Neshama Chadash, Alter Rebbe was called the Neshama Chadash, came down into this world, like on Tzarichas, and he said to him the following. The Baal Shem Tov said to the Mezitcher Magid, quote, Ich hab gehat Mesiras Nefesh, soll mich nicht kennen. I had Mesiras Nefesh that he shouldn't know me. Is deiner. He's yours. The Baal Shem Tov told us to the Magid about the Alter Rebbe. Aber du wirst davon warten, soll kommen von sich allein. You can't go look for him. He has to come on his own. And the Alter Rebbe came, the Alter Rebbe left, and he forgot a shmata, he went back pushing for a shmata, so he had to come back into the Beis Medrash a second time, and then he decided to stay. So this is the hasbara that people, nobody wants to say it official, because no one knows for sure, but the fact that the Rebbe did not meet the Rebbe Rashab is really odd. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The Rebbe was prevented from saying the Rebbe Rashab. There was a chassid who lived here in America, who was a very big chassid, a very great chassid. His name was Rebbe Shmuel Levittin. He was known stam as Rebbe Shmuel. He was a very big chassid. Rebbe Shmuel Levittin once walked, as chassidim go, he was the closest thing to the Rebbe. The Rebbe chatted with him. The Rebbe didn't chat with anybody. The Rebbe didn't schmooze with anybody. The Frierdiker Rebbe used to schmooze with people. The Rebbe didn't really sit around and schmooze. I mean, maybe they say Chadakov, Yamagardetsky. The Rebbe was not a kind of guy, kind of a Rebbe who engaged with his chassidim on a personal level. Rebbe Shmuel was to a very great extent the exception. Rebbe Shmuel walked out of the Rebbe's room shaking. They saw he was very upset. And they said to Rebbe Shmuel, what did the Rebbe say that's so upsetting? He says, the Rebbe just told me that he's happy he never saw the Rashab. Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch. The Rebbe once told somebody, Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch listening to the Rebbe Rashab say Chassidus before I was born, the Rebbe once said. Shmuel was an old chassid, and Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch, and Rebbe Shmuel couldn't believe that the Rebbe would make such a statement, that he's happy he didn't meet the Rebbe Rashab, and he explained why. If I had met the Rebbe Rashab, it would have disturbed my bond, my connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe, to the Rebbe the Shver, to the Rebbe's Rebbe. So this is history. These are facts, right? The explanation of the facts are, as they say in the real world, neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, the Rebbe was never in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab passed away. The Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe. It's not a secret that the Rebbe Levik was not exactly the Frierdiker Rebbe's chassid. He recognized that the Frierdiker Rebbe was the Rebbe, and he worked with him, and the only Yonim from Mesiras Nefesh. They were cousins, and they were Mechutanim. But most people will tell you that the Rebbe's father and the Frierdiker Rebbe was not a chassid Rebbe relationship. But the Rebbe went to Rostov. He did go to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Now, It's very, very difficult to know why he went. Did he go first for a shidduch and then meet Chassidus, or did he go first for Chassidus and then earn a shidduch? I would like to believe, and there's no way to prove this for sure, that the Rebbe wanted a staff because he wanted a Rebbe. The Rebbe is our Rebbe. The Rebbe was a giant of giants, and the Rebbe was 19 and a half. When he met the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe was 20 and a half. He was 20 years old, 20 and a half. He came for Sukkot Tafresh Pegimel the first time to the Rebbe Rayatz. He spent Sukkot, and the Rebbe Rayatz Frierdiker was very makar of him. He put him behind. He stood behind the Frierdiker Rebbe by Fabrengenish. Frierdiker was makar of him. And during that year, he met the Rebbe Achei Temimim, and they courted. The Rebbe was 20 and a half, and then 21. So the Rebbetzin was 21 and a half, and then 22 when they met. They were young. The wedding wouldn't happen for another 6 years. But initially they met in 1923, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin met. And we know this from letters, which are now in print. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes to his wife, to his daughter, to the Rebbe Achei Temimim. And the letter written from the summertime, from Tammuz, he says, we spent a week together, he writes. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the letter, this week I diligently studied the Torah of Mendel. Torah's Mendel. And he writes, I think I understand them a little. Frierdiker Rebbe writes, I think I understand them a little. We spent the whole week together, the three of them. That means the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe and the Rashag. And every day they walked for a few hours and they talked. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes to his daughter, the way our home operates, the way our house is, he never saw such a house. If Rebbetzin Chana would have seen that letter, she probably would have taken issue. But that's what he writes. The way our house operates, I'm assuming it means how peaceful and loving and open it was. He's never seen such a home. And he writes, his feelings are completely different than they were 6 months ago. So this tells us that 6 months before he had visited another time, and the Rebbe was uncomfortable. We know from sources, and again, I don't know how reliable, but Bet 11 brings it down, that the Rebbe was in Rostov a second time in the winter. He came for Sukkot, he came again in the winter, and by Hashgacha Pratis, and this is more than Hashgacha Pratis, this is Hashgacha Pratis, the two Shabbos the Rebbe was in Rostov that winter, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to my Morim, that are word for word, the Maimer Bossi Legani from Tafshin Yud. Word and word for word. The two Shabbos, the second time the Rebbe met the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to my Morim Pashas Boyim, Pashas Beshalach, the first Shabbos said the 10 Perakim, which by us divided into 2 Maimorim. The second Shabbos said the second 10 Perakim, which is again by us divided up into 2 Maimorim. And it's word for word Maimorim that 27 years later the Rebbe Rayatz would give out for Yom Mistalkusei. And it's compelling, it's almost disturbing how precise this is. So the Shidduch was introduced early. And a lot of people came with the Shidduch. There's an old English expression, success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan. The Rebbe's Shidduch apparently was a success because there's 1 million people take credit for the Shidduch. One of the people who deserved some of the credit was Rebbe Achei Temimim, who was a big chassid. He was a Nikolayever. Our Rebbe was born in Nikolai. Our Rebbe's grandfather, Rebbe Tzadchane, was the daughter of the Nikolayever of. Rebbe Leivik spent 7 years after his chasana, or more, 10 years in Nikolayev. The Rebbe spent his 7 formative years, 7 early years of the Rebbe's life. The Rebbe lived in Nikolayev. Rebbe Chaim knew him from then, Rebbe Chaim knew him from later, and he came to the Frierdiker Rebbe with the idea. Apparently he introduced the Rebbe to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And then the trouble started. I don't know what the trouble is. Again, the shmua is that the Rebbe's father was an issue, there won't be any children. And there's all kinds of stories about what happened consequent to that, subsequent to that. One of them is that the Rebbe said to his own father, the Rebbe said to his father, oh, but the Rebbe veist das soichet. You're saying that this is not a good shidduch, there won't be children. The Rebbe knows what you know. If you know it, the Frierdiker Rebbe for sure knows it. And the Frierdiker Rebbe nevertheless wants the shidduch. No? So if the Rebbe wants the shidduch, it's mustama a good thing. The Rebbe was arguing with his father. The real truth is, and I think this has been confirmed, is that the Rebbe's Shatchen was the Rebbe Rashab. Not the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab had said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, when obviously B'chaim Chiyasab Al Ma'adein, wegen der mittelste darf man trachten wegen eine von Levi gesehen. The Frierdiker Rebbe had 3 daughters. The oldest daughter married the Rashab, Gerari, and the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the middle daughter you should think about one of Levi's sons. Understand, the Levi had 3 sons. The Rebbe was the oldest, and he was a year younger than the Rebbe Achei Temimim. So exactly who was going to marry the Rebbe Achei Temimim? You understand? The Rebbe was a year younger than her. So the Rebbe Rashab was involved in making the Rebbe Shidduch. It's also known, I think this is also considered a fact, that after Sheva Brachas, in Tafresh Pintas, when the Rebbe finally got married, the Rebbe Rayat sent a telegram asking a chassid to go to Rostov, go to his father's teen in Rostov, and to say, Dein Rotzen hat sich ausgeführt. What you wanted, we carried through. The Rebbe Rashab was the one who originally proposed the Shidduch, but the Rebbe Achei Temimim, he called her the mittelste Tochter, the middle daughter, and the Rebbe, the Levik's son, the Rebbe. The Rebbe Zog is an our Rebbe. So again, all the pratim are hard to know, but it took 5 years for them to get married. It took a very long time for them to get married. And there's a couple of very interesting episodes that happened intermittently during that time that are printed, that are known. If they were known, I wouldn't know them. And even though I make up stories all the time, of course, but I try to have a source for stories that I make up. This is printed in the Sikha. The Rebbe was standing next to his brother Label behind the Friedrich Rebbe. The two of them were standing behind the Friedrich Rebbe together. Rebbe Chaim Altos was at the Fabrengen. Chaim Altos was considered a big chassid. He was very chashiv a chassid. So Rebbe Chaim leans forward and he says to the Friedrich Rebbe, pointing at the Rebbe, a chassid. Take him as a chassid for your daughter. So the Friedrich put out his hands like this here, and he says, Mi yitain. I wish. Mi yitain. Halavai. The Rebbe put out his hands. The Friedrich Rebbe wanted the Shidduch, and the Shidduch was slow in coming. It was a complicated, the Shidduch was complicated, yeah. Apparently. It's very difficult to answer that question. This I will tell you. That the night that the Friedrich Rebbe was arrested, so the way the story is known is that the Rebbe was walking towards the house. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The Rebbe's Achei Temimim opened up the window. The Rebbe's Kala opened up the window, and she shouted, Shneir son mir haben guest. Shneir son we have guest. So the Rebbe turned around, and he ran to the different chassidim who had the documents that had to be destroyed, Chaim Lieberman and Choni Marazov, to destroy the incriminating evidence. But I believe that the beginning of the story was that they were taking a walk. And they saw all the lights were on in the house. And the Rebbetzins said, this is not. So she said, wait, I'll go in myself. And the Rebbe, once got by Fabrengen, Yud Tammuz, and he was shikir. He said, if not for the Rebbe, there would not have been Yud Tammuz, our Rebbe. And the Rebbe turned to him and he said to him, Noch nish gekommen die Zeit zum Megala sein. The time to reveal that has not yet come. And there's nobody to tell the story. There's a story that we don't know. How the Rebbe saved the Friedrich Rebbe's life. But that night, the Rebbe ran away. He didn't come into the house. And he did what he had to do. He went to the people who had the documents. Later that night, they were both arrested. But they managed to destroy all the incriminating evidence intermittently because the Rebbe came and warned them that they had been by the Friedrich Rebbe to arrest him. Anyway, the Friedrich Rebbe leaves Russia after going to jail and coming out of jail. We all know that story. And when the Friedrich Rebbe left Russia, so did the Rebbe. And there's a story connected to that as well. That when the Rebbe wanted to leave Russia, the Friedrich Rebbe was leaving Russia. So Koydem Kol, he was not thrilled to leave Russia. The Friedrich Rebbe was not thrilled to leave. The Friedrich Rebbe wasn't happy with leaving Russia. He left Russia because he had no choice. He always felt that his home was Russia and his Hasidim were the Russians, not the Polish and not the Americans. But the Eibishter Gefiert, the Eibishter led him, but he wasn't happy to go. And he made all kinds of conditions. Amongst the conditions were that he's taking along all of his Svarim, all of his library, which was the whole politics, but they agreed. And the other condition was that he could take his entire family, and they agreed to that too. So he made a list of his family members: his wife, his mother, his wife, his daughters, his grandson, his son-in-law, his grandson, and his son-in-law to be. So the Russian government told him, the Friedrich Rebbe, an Eidim kemeshafan an andere. A son-in-law to be is okay. Let him stay in Russia. You'll break the shidduch. He'll marry somebody else. So the story goes. The Friedrich Rebbe said to the Russians, I'm not getting such a son-in-law. I'm not getting any place. Yeah. So we don't know for sure whether this story ended with the Russian government giving the Rebbe permission to leave on the Friedrich Rebbe's passport or not. I suspect that they didn't. The government said not letting go. Our Rebbe was a chevreman first class. You don't need me to tell you how big a chevreman the Rebbe is. And he understood the Soviets well. When the Rebbe used to speak about, when you want to get something done with the Russians, do it quietly. Here in America, he would scream about that. The Rebbe knew what he was talking about. The bottom line is, the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia right after Sukkot. So did the Rebbe. And there's a story. The Rebbe got himself out of Russia. Again, I don't know if he left with the Frierdiker Rebbe's passport or not, but almost at the same time the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, so did the Rebbe. The difference was this. The Frierdiker Rebbe was living in Leningrad. I don't know if you know the map, but Leningrad is up here to the top. I was in Leningrad more than 30 years ago. If you go to certain parts of Leningrad, there's an ocean. And you could literally see Finland. You could see it with your eyes. You could see another country. That's how small the estuary is, the enclave, the little piece of bay, of ocean that separates Leningrad from Finland. So the Rebbe left from Leningrad. He took a train. He went straight. He went into Finland, I'm assuming, and then he went west from there. The Rebbe went home for Yom Tov. The Rebbe's parents lived in Yekaterinoslavl, in Petrovsk. You know what that is? That's 1,000 miles south or more. It's in the Ukraine, on the river Dnieper. It's very far. So the Rebbe left, the Frierdiker Rebbe left from the very top of Russia. The Rebbe left from the bottom of Russia. He stayed that Tishrei with his parents, and it was a very hard to get Tishrei. The Rebbe's father and the Rebbe and his mother knew that this was a serious goodbye, and of course, as it proved to be, he would never see his father again. Of course, his mother he would see some 20 years later, but his father was never zeicher to see again. And they both understood that there was a realistic possibility. This was a goodbye for good. These are two people, these are gedolim. You know, big people, when they love big. If you read the Rebbe's father's letters of Leivik, he writes like his letters are so full of love. I mean, your grandmother doesn't write such loving letters. Mamish, the Rebbe's father, his letters are oozing. The love that he feels to the Rebbe and to the Rebbe to Chaimushka it's pouring out of every word. You could feel how much he loved them. And he longed for them. So that Tishrei was a very important Tishrei, very emotional, and the Rebbe spent it with his father. That Simchas Torah, they danced non-stop. And the next morning the Rebbe left. When the Rebbe left, his parents got on the train, and they accompanied him. Rebbe Leivik went a few stops, and he said his goodbyes, and he got off. The Rebbetzins Chana traveled with the Rebbe till the Finnish border, all the way till the top of Russia. She went all the way as far as she could go, and then she went back. Parenthetically, I forgot a story which I think could tie in a little bit to this mindset. There are a lot of stories about the Rebbe. You don't need me to tell you, there's a lot of stories about the Rebbe. And like they say about the Baal Shem Tov, if you believe them all, you're a fool. If you don't believe they could have happened, you're a heretic. That certainly applies to the Rebbe. But some stories are true. How come we know they're true? Because they were told by the Rebbe's own mother. The Rebbetzin Chana lived in New York until 1964. She talked about the Rebbe. There was a Jewish writer, a Yiddish writer, who lived in New York. He came from the Achei Temimim. He didn't have a beard. But it was a bigger chassid than a lot of people would grace a bed. His name was Nissen Gordon. He was the oldest of the Gordon brothers. And his pen name was Nun ben Yochanan. Nissen ben Yochanan Gordon. Nun ben Yochanan. Nissen Gordon did an 11-part series on the Zibit Lubavitcher Rebbe. They printed in the old Yiddish Haim. And if anybody wants, send me an email. I think I have them on my computer. I'll send you a PDF from the Ganze Meise.
It's Yiddish?
It's Yiddish. It was never translated into English as far as I know. The Zibit Lubavitcher Rebbe Shlita. And these articles came out when the Rebbe's mother was still alive, in the late 50s, early 60s. He interviewed the Rebbe's mother, and the stories in those articles are very true. And it's really the best source of good material in the Rebbe's early life, of which we know very little, is what she told Nissen Gordon. I understand that the Rebbe wasn't so thrilled with it, but the Rebbe let it through. One of the stories is that the Rebbe's bar mitzvah was from a Thursday evening till Shabbos. So there's two parts, and I hope I'm repeating it correctly. I mean, I read this story before I got married. Okay, I'm married 31 years, so I have the articles, but I never looked at them again. I took the Yiddish Haim, I copied out those 11 articles, and I made them into one PDF. I have them someplace on my computer. If you'll send me an email, I can find them. I'll be happy to. It's my pleasure to share. I have them in one folder, or just print them out, yeah? But one of the stories was that the Rebbe's bar mitzvah was Thursday night. So the men were in one room, the women were in another. Remember, they made the bar mitzvah in their apartment. They had already moved to Yekaterinoslavl, but they had a very, very big apartment. They had a gigantic apartment. After the Soviets took over, they took the apartment and split it in half, and the apartment became very small. But they took the apartment in Yekaterinoslavl, they took a gigantic apartment, So there was enough room for everybody. They had hundreds of guests. The men were in one part of the house, and the women were in another part of the house. The Rebbe said his Torah, his drasha, whatever it was, a maimetzah, on the Nigal was. When the Rebbe finished, this was Thursday evening, the Rebbe started to cry. And he cried so heavily, he was a 13-year-old, that the entire room cried with him. The Rebbe Zechana said she was in the other room and she was trying to figure out what's going on. Now there's a shmua, and the Rebbe Zechana writes, the Rebbe's father kept on asking the Rebbe for something, beginning from that Thursday. And the Rebbe wouldn't agree. Now the Rebbe's mother could have known what that was, but the way Nun ben Yochanan tells the story, we don't know what the discussion was. But the Rebbe's father wanted something from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wasn't agreeing, was not acquiescing, was not agreeing. Till Motzei Shabbos, from Thursday night to Motzei Shabbos, that's 2 days. Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe finally agreed to what it was that his father was asking him to do. And then that Motzei Shabbos was so freilich, you have no idea. So Nun ben Yochanan speculates, who knows? Maybe the discussion then was already about the Rebbe. But the Rebbe's mother probably had some idea what the discussion was, but she doesn't tell him. She just says that the Rebbe Levi wanted something from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wouldn't agree. They would not agree. And the Rebbe Levi was maftzir. He asked again and again and again over the course of 2 whole days. Motzei Shabbos, finally the Rebbe agreed, and then there was a moedin de kesimcha in the house. Again, I don't know. Yochanan Gordon says, Nissen writes, we don't know what it was, but maybe it was that the Rebbe should, again, at the Bar Mitzvah Yingele, to agree to the Inyan of the Siyas, to be a Rebbe. So, this is just a story that I'm sharing, because you're probably not going to hear it from anybody else. If you send me an email, I'll send you the Yiddish Shehem, and if I've told the story incorrectly, you'll come back tomorrow and tell me what I said wrong. Because I saw the story of a third. It's not the kind of story you forget, this is one of those special stories. Anyway, the Rebbe's mother accompanied the Rebbe all through Russia. And they traveled overnight. To travel from Yekaterinslav to the Finnish border to Leningrad was probably 2 days, maybe 48 hours on the train. Trains don't move that fast. They move faster than cars, but they don't move that fast, especially then. And the Rebbe got up in the morning, stood up, and put on his tefillin. On a Soviet train in 1927. You could get lynched for that. You could get lynched for being a Jew, let alone for putting on film. The Rebbe's mother said, I was filled with fear. The Rebbe made believe he had no idea where he was. He stood up and he put on film. And the Rebbe's mother said, suddenly Russian Goyim got up from their seats and they made a circle around the Rebbe to block that people shouldn't see. And they stood there for the duration of the davening. The entire time that the Rebbe davened, a bunch of Goyim created a mechitza around the Rebbe that nobody should see what the Rebbe was doing until the Rebbe, this is the story, the Rebbe's mother was a witness until the Rebbe finished the davening and he took off his tefillin and he sat down and the Goyim went and sat down. A meisa pille ployim mamish. Anyway, the Rebbe of course crosses the Russian border into Finland and then he makes his way west. I think he went into Finland. What's the name of the capital of Finland? Does anybody remember? Helsinki. Very good. And then he made his way west. West means towards Riga, Latvia, where the Frierdiker Rebbe was. The Rebbe joined the Frierdiker Rebbe in Latvia, and they were planning a wedding. The wedding wouldn't take place for a year. The wedding took place for a whole year. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the wedding didn't take place. One of the reasons that we know is that the Rebbe's parents were hoping to come to the wedding, and they kept on delaying it because they were trying to ask for a visa to leave for a visit to Latvia, and the Russians wouldn't give them that permission. And when it was clear that it wasn't going to happen, they made the wedding, but that took a long time. There's also evidence that there was still trouble. The Rebbe's father and the Frierdiker Rebbe were still at odds about certain things that negate to the Rebbe, and this delayed the chasna. Again, there's things that I've heard that I'm not repeating. That even after the Rebbe had left Russia, there was still some discussion that maybe the shidduch would be broken for this reason, for this reason, for this reason, which we're not going to get into at all. And then the last reason was, there was no money. The Frierdiker Rebbe wanted the Rebbe's wedding to be the grandest event in all of Europe. And it was. And he had no money. A Yid in Eretz Yisrael, a big chassid, his name is Avraham Parish, he was a poor Jew, was working on an old train track, old British train track, someplace in Eretz Yisrael. and he came across a bag of gold coins that was worth then thousands and thousands of dollars. He took the bag, he went straight to the bank, didn't even go home. And he asked how much each one of these coins worth. They gave him a price. He liquidated all of that gold into cash, and he wired the last dime to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Didn't take himself a penny. And Chassidim told him, "You idiot! You're such a poor person. You could have kept 5%. And most people give 10%, 20%. He gave the Rebbe 100%." And they told him, "Huh? Rabbi Avram Parish. Avram Parish. There's probably grandchildren of him in this room. He was a big chassid, and he had a great mishpacha. The Wolves from Etisol were his descendants. Rabbi Ephraim Wolf was his son-in-law. He was a very big mukusha. That was his thing. He was a very hard chassid, a big mukusha. And people told him what kind of fool he was, and he says, "No, I wish I was a bigger fool. I'd be a bigger chassid." Something to that effect. That money made the Rebbe's chassid. You imagine this chus? A yid could have made himself rich. He sent the money to Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe made the chassid that he wanted to make for the Rebbe. But it took more than a year. Now, of course, technically what happened was the Frierdiker Rebbe was given immigration rights in Riga. The Latvian government allowed the Frierdiker Rebbe to live there. And of course, there's a story, there's a Mishpachas Dubav, I'm related to them, that they have in their family a very interesting little detail of the story. That when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to Latvia, he needed a job. He needed a shul. Rabbi Yitzchak Dubav alav shalom was a rav in a shul in Riga. He gave the Frierdiker Rebbe his rabbonos. He moved to England, and it saved his life because the Nazis never occupied England. The States, he was able to survive. And the Frierdiker Rebbe got the rabbonos, became a rav in a shul, was a rabbi in a shul in Latvia, which was a modern country, a Western country. And the Rebbe was there, along with there were 6 members of the family. 6 members of the family. The Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbe's daughters, the Rebbe's son, the Rebbe's grandson. And the Latvian government would not allow the Rebbe to stay. They didn't give him rights to stay. So by Adar of that year, by February or March of, this is now, you're talking now, 1928, the Rebbe was forced to leave Latvia and go to Germany. Why to Germany? Again, this is all the Das Tachten, the Das Elyon, Elyon, Nishka Elyon. They went to school. By going to school, he was given a student visa.
Only the Rebbe was not the...
Right, he wasn't a member of the family. This is the story that I told you before, that the Russians only let 6 people on the visa. The Rebbe, I'm assuming he got out on his own way, but the Latvian government said to the Rebbe, "You are not a member of the family. We never gave you the immigration permit, the immigration exception that they gave the Frierdiker Rebbe." The Bar Chadum was a big Lubavitcher chassid. He was a member of the parliament. He got the Frierdiker Rebbe out of Russia, and he got his government to agree to take the Frierdiker Rebbe. But not all the Lubavitcher chassidim in the world, you understand? So the Rebbe had to move to Berlin. And he lived in Berlin for a year, till the Chassanet. I believe that at some point he was joined by his brother. Label also left Russia. And for a short period they were roommates. In other words, when the Rebbe got married, obviously Label had to go take a different apartment. But while the Rebbe was still single, I believe his brother Label joined him and they shared an apartment, which l'cha'oira means that the Rebbe's brother Label was at the Rebbe's wedding. But I'm not 100% sure about this. This I do know. There was a chassid by the name of Zelik Slonim. Zelik Slonim was a Slonim. He was a cousin of the Rebbe's. He was a Mitlav Zanemikel. Zelik Slonim was a very big chassid. I heard from a shliach once, he was the first Mader and Shliach. He was a Mader and Shliach by the Frierdiker Rebbe. Zelik Slonim was an Israeli Jew who learned in Lubavitch, who went in and out of countries like you go in and out of classrooms. And he met the Rebbe in Berlin. And he said to the Rebbe, "I really want to be at the Chassanet, but I can't get a visa." He was an Israeli. Israel was Palestine. It was British. After World War I, it was the British. So the Rebbe went with him to the immigration office. He tells the story. The Rebbe went with me to help me get papers. I should be able to go to his Chassanet. That's very personal. Zelik Slonim. The Rebbe was in Berlin. He was in Berlin. And he was by the Rebbe's Chassanet. He sent the Rebbe a gift. They had a very special relationship. And then when the Rebbe became a Rebbe, he was the Rebbe's a chassid without any pshara. Anyway, I told you everything but the story, right? What did I tell you? All the preliminary stuff. So as I always do, Seminary Aleph 2, my 2 to 3 o'clock period is going to be the hemshech of this Maaseh, and I'd be really, really delighted to send all of you all 3 parts. If you're so inclined, I will see you tomorrow. I don't like repeating the same material 3 times, so what I do is, each yoima that we're me'ayin in, I start with seminary Beis. I continue with you, and I finish tomorrow with seminary Aleph 1, which I do at 1 o'clock. So I started the story of the Rebbe's wedding with the seminary Beis girls, and I told them the whole story, except I didn't get to the wedding at all. So I'm going to be telling you the story. It's going to sound like it's from the beginning, but there's a whole prefix to it, and then in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow there'll be a whole suffix. If anybody, it's the same speech I give you every time. If anybody wants all 3 recordings, send me an email. I'll be delighted, I'll be thrilled, I'll be happy, I'll be flattered and honored to send it to you. Anyway, but today we're doing the Rebbe's Chassaneh, okay? That's the topic. I told the girls a lot of background, how the Tzemach Tzedek had predicted that his oldest son's descendants would be Rebbe after 4 generations. I talked to the girls about the Rebbe initially meeting the Rebbetzins Chaim Mushka. I mean, the way the story seems to have happened was they met, and there was discussion of a shidduch, and then trouble started. Exactly what kind of trouble is hard to know, but evidently the rumors are, and I never met Mr. Rumor, he's very hard to meet. He likes to be evasive, that the Rebbe's father was not entirely in favor of the shidduch, because the Rebbe's father knew with his koyach of Kabbalah that there would not be any children. And the Rebbe said to his father, the Rebbe knows that also. The Frierdiker Rebbe also knows that. He nevertheless wanted the shidduch. Of course, they got married, right? They got married, and of course, as they say in the real world, they lived happily ever after. And unfortunately, physically, they never had any children, although spiritually, they have literally millions of children, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins. But that seems to be what happened. The Rebbe met the Rebbetzins in 1923, or the end of 1922, and they got married in 1928. Between 1922 and 1923 and 1928, there's 6 years. So there was reasons the wedding was delayed. It seems that even later on, one of the reasons became financial. The Frierdiker wanted to make a very, very big wedding for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. He didn't have the resources, and the money came like money from Menashemayim. Someone sent him a lot of money, a very big surprise. A donor who was broke found the treasure, and he sent a whole treasure to Frierdiker Rebbe as a matana, and with that money, the wedding of the Rebbe was made.
What year was it?
Tafresh Pei Tes, the end of 1928. It was November 1928. The Rebbe was 1928. The Rebbe was 25 and a half.
Was that old for those days?
I think so. And the Rebbetzin was 26 and a half. She was a year older than the Rebbe. Now, there's a story which I did not tell the girls from the other group, which I should have told them, but the fact that I didn't tell them is their loss is your gain. It's an interesting story with a piece of history. And again, people have criticized me for telling the story. I shouldn't tell the story because I'm embarrassing the Rabbeim, I don't know what. Bottom line is the story is now printed in a book, so nobody can hold it against me for telling the story because the story is well known. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin met in the early 20s, 23. Subsequent to those meetings, while the Frierdiker was still living in Rostov, the Frierdiker moved away from Rostov in 1924. The Rebbetzin Chana traveled to Rostov by herself. The Rebbe's mother came to the Frierdiker Rebbe. She stayed in the house for a few weeks. She stayed in the house with the Frierdiker Rebbe for a few weeks. There was a tradition in the olden days, which of course we would never do because we are really modern and sophisticated and cultured and logical and idiotic and fantastic, which was to uncook in the kala, right? In the olden days, how did you choose a wife? Take a wild guess. How did a guy choose a wife? Or take a wild guess. How did a girl choose a husband?
Friends.
She asked her brothers. Or her father. He asked his mother or sisters. That's how shidduchim were done. When a boy and a girl had to get married, the boy didn't meet the girl. What's a boy know about girls? His sister met the girl. It actually makes sense. There's a point of a boy and a girl meeting. Api Alochi, you're not allowed to get engaged without seeing the person. It's a din. But what does the boy know about a girl? What does the girl know about a boy? The shidduchim were made by siblings or by parents. So the Rebbetzin Chana came to the Frierdiker Rebbe's house, and she lived there for a few weeks. She wanted to see how the house runs. And of course, she observed the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka up close. And the end of the story was, at the end of that visit, now this is part of the story you want to listen to, she had an appointment of Yechidus on Frierdiker Rebbe. And she said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, my husband gave me the authority to agree to the shidduch. The Rebbe gave the Rebbetzin Chana the right to decide yes or no. And she decided affirmative. She said, yeah, she's agreeing to the shidduch. But there's a condition. The Rebbe's father, Rebbe Leivik, made a condition. That the shidduch was based on a condition. What's the condition? Naden. Do you know what naden is? A dowry. What's a dowry? In Chumash, you have harbu alai mayer matan. Which parsha is that in? Harbu alai mayer matan. It's the story of Dina. It's an Architas. Harbu alai mayer matan means add a big dowry, I'm rich. Right? We all know the story of Shem and Chamoir, and they did something terrible, and they wanted the Dina should marry Shem, and you name your price, you got it. It's called a dowry. In the olden days, a boy and a girl got married. The girl's family had to give the boy and the boy's family a wealth, a shidduch, as a part of the shidduch. It's called nad. They used to give chickens and goats and whatever else. But of course, the basic nad is money. Now, most couples that get married today, I don't know too many people who are nadin. It's you can barely afford to pay for the wedding. How are you supposed to make nadin? But in the olden days, that was part of the package. A boy got married, especially a chassan like the Rebbe. The presumption was that the Machon were going to give him money that would allow him to sit and learn for a while, that would help him start a business. The dowry was supposed to be substantial. It wasn't supposed to be 10 cents. It was supposed to be a lot of money. The Rebbe twice, you know that the Rebbe twice asked from someone for nadin? Twice. The Rebbe asked for nadin twice. The Rebbe said, "I'm tzad chosen." When Rabbi Yael Khan got married, the Rebbe said to Zalman Butman, "You have to give him nadin." Ich bin tzad chosen. The Rebbe said, "I'm the chosen tzad." His parents were in Israel. You have to give him a dowry. And Isaac Shvei of Shalom also. The Rebbe insisted that Isaac was a yosem. He didn't have a father, and the Rebbe said, "You want this chosen? I'm the chosen's tzad. You have to give a dowry." So the Rebbe's mother told the Friedrich Rebbe that the condition of the chassan is that you have to give the Friedrich. The Rebbe said, "It's not an hour, Rebbe nadin." So the Friedrich Rebbe said, "I have no money." It was a very difficult time. There was no money in the house. Chamesh geld. So the Rebbetzins Chana said, "Drum roll, please. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for Rabbistve."
What?
Rabbistve. The nadin is that the Rebbe is next. This is a true story, girls. Before the Rebbe and Rebbetzin got engaged, the Rebbe's mother told the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, that my husband insists that he ask for a dowry, and the dowry is a guarantee for succession, a guarantee that the Rebbe is going to be the Rebbe after the Friedrich Rebbe. I know the story from two different sources. There was a Jew who passed away very young. His name was Yossi Paltiel, Shalom. He told me the story personally. He heard it from Motel Kazerminsky, who heard it from Chaim Lieberman. Chaim Lieberman, the Friedrich Rebbe's secretary, in the Pasha of the Sfarim, he joined the other team, and he left 770. On his deathbed, he revealed the story that he was in the house when the Rebbetzin Chana came in 1923. 27 years before the Rebbe became a Rebbe, and there was a negotiation that the Rebbe is going to be the next Rebbe. The story is also printed in a book from Reb Zalman Geradi, which is called B'chol Beis in Emanu. He was also in the house. And he also remembered the story. And he also repeated the story. And I think there's a third source of the story. There was a Jew who lived in New York. His name was Harav Sender Reinin. He was a clean-shaven Jew, a big chassid on aboard. He remembered the story as well. So when the Friedrich Rebbe passed away, and the Rebbe is refusing to become Rebbe, he said, "Excuse me, this is a precondition to your wedding." You know what he answered? The Friedrich Rebbe never told me. He knew the story. I assure you his parents told him the story more than once. But the Friedrich Rebbe, I have to hear from the Friedrich Rebbe, not from my father, not from my mother. I have to hear from the Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe never told it to him. And then the end of the story was that Chassidim went to the Oyhel, and they said to the Friedrich Rebbe that the Rebbe is saying, hat nicht kein Hira, that he was never told. It was like Ba'omer. That day the Rebbe visited the Oyhel. He never used that excuse again. The excuse of the hat nicht kein Hira, he never used again. But before the Rebbe was engaged to be married, this was a precondition that the Rebbe would be the next Rebbe. Now, so when the Friedrich Rebbe agreed, the Rebbetzin Chana said, "I want you to put it in writing. I want a ksav." So the Friedrich Rebbe said, "I can't put it in writing." And then there's two suffixes, two different versions. Again, I heard the story from two different people. From Chaim Lieberman I heard, Chassidim val alein verstehen, Chassidim will understand themselves. And in Zalman Gerari Sefer it says, "Ba'uns avort is avort." By us, when we give you our word, it's our word. In other words, most people Words have no koyach. Words are called in halacha pitpuli mili ba'almut geplapelt. People, I can promise you $1 million. I owe you not 10 cents because words have no koyach. But amirase gevaya lebesirase lehedyet. When it comes to kachim, comes to holy things, words are like an action. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "My words are as good as a shtar." So before the Rebbe was engaged, this was already negotiated. Now there's a bunch of stories. The Rebbe's engagement was complicated. Apparently.
Why was it so important for the Russian comment that there had to be taxes?
Oh, the correct answer to that question is, I don't have a clue. But I have a whole imaginary, I have a whole version, a whole story, which I told the other group. Rebbe Leivik thought he's supposed to be a Rebbe. Because the Tzemach Tzedek said that after 4 generations, it's going to come back to their branch of the family. When Rebbe Leivik didn't become a Rebbe, and the Rebbe became the Eidim, he said, I made a mistake in the generations, the Rebbe is going to be the Rebbe. Do you know a story that I heard, and again, I know the names of the people all the way back. There was a Yid by the name of Reb Simcha Gorodetsky. He was a big chassid. You know Simcha Gorodetsky, you know why? His granddaughter is Mrs. Raskin in high school. Reb Simcha Gorodetsky was in Siberia for many years. He was in a lot of places. He came out of Russia much later. He didn't come out with all the anash. He was a big chassid. Simcha Gorodetsky was in the Rebbe's parents' house in the 1930s. And the mail arrived. Reb Leivik picks up the mail. He sifts through the mail, puts it down. Reb Leivik, the Rebbe's father, puts on his kapota, puts on his hat, puts on his gartel, washes his hands and opens a letter. Now, when was the last time you got a letter from anybody and you put on your hat and your gartel and you wash your hands? So Reb Simcha says to Reb Leivik, who is that letter from? He figured it must be from the Frierdiker Rebbe. And Reb Leivik was not considered such a big chassid of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is why he wanted to see. He says, it's a letter from my son. So Reb Simcha says, for your son, you put on your gartel and you wash your hands. So Reb Leivik said to Reb Simcha Gorodetsky, hat mir shein lange begestiegen, which means he passed me by a long time ago. The Rebbe's father knew who the Rebbe was. He had a very, very high opinion of his son. And it was very important to him that this should happen, that the Tzemach Tzedek's promise, that after 4 generations it would come back to that branch of the family, should be seen through, should happen by Poyel Mamish. Now, of course, I told the girls in the other room the story. They all left Russia at the end of 1927, Tov Reish Peches. Between the time they left Russia and the Chassan, it was about 14 months. A little bit less than 14 months. Now, of course, the plan was that the Rebbe is going to live in Riga, Latvia, where the Frierdiker Rebbe lived. The Latvian government told the Rebbe he can't stay in the country. The Rebbe left Russia on a Russian passport. And by the way, the Rebbe came to New York on a Russian passport. The Frierdiker Rebbe changed his citizenship to Latvian citizenship, and being a Latvian citizen would end up saving his life. Our Rebbe never bothered changing his passport. He remained a Russian citizen, and he had to live in other countries only as a student. This is one of the explanations in Das Tachton, where the Rebbe had to be in school all of those years, even though if you read his transcripts, he missed more than half the school days. If there were 100 days of school, the Rebbe came for 47 of them, was because he had student visas. In Berlin, he had a student visa. He was living in the country as a student. When he moved to Paris, he was living as a student visa. When he finished school in 1938, the Rebbe first applied for French citizenship, which of course never happened because the war came. But the Rebbe was using a Russian passport. So they did not allow him to stay in Riga, Latvia, so he had to leave. So even though the Rebbe was marrying the Frierdiker Rebbe's daughter, the Rebbetzins Chaya Mushka, they were separated by countries. The Rebbe went to live in Berlin. There's evidence, and again, I'm not sure 100%, but there's evidence that while the Rebbe was still single and living in Berlin, the Rebbe's brother Label joined him. He also got out of Russia. He also came to Berlin. He was also a student. And the Rebbe and Label were roommates for a while. Once the Rebbe got married, obviously they couldn't be roommates anymore. But until the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got married, the Rebbe and his brother shared a room. And I told the girls from Seminary Beis a story about a chassid whose name was Shmer Sasonkin. Whose name was Zelig Shlonim, that he visited the Rebbe in Berlin. He was a cousin of the Rebbe's. And he told the Rebbe, I want to go to your wedding in France. In Poland. I'm having a very hard time getting a visa, permission to enter the country. And the Rebbe went with him to the immigration office to negotiate that they should let him come to our Rebbe's chassanet. So Zelig Shlonim Lash says, imagine the Rebbe helped me come to his wedding. That was the Rebbe. Anyway, the Rebbe was in Berlin, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Latvia. Now the Rebbe used to come to the Frierdiker Rebbe, to the Shved, for every Yom Tov. He came for Sukkot, he came for Pesach. The wedding took place in Kislev in Poland. The Frierdiker Rebbe made 3 weddings. The small wedding, the first wedding was not even a wedding. It was a kiddush. They drank lemonade. They had no money for mashke. When the Rashag married Chanegrai, there was such poverty in the house that they mamish served sardines and crackers. The wedding was incredibly impoverished. It was a very, very hard time in Russia. They got married. The chuppah of a kiddushin, were the same. It was kosher, legit, but there was no expense disposed for in that wedding. There was just no money. When the younger sister got married, her name was Shandel. She got married in Sadat Beis, I think, in 32. The Rebbe made a nice wedding, 3-day wedding, in a retirement area near Vilna. The wedding was attended by a lot of Gedolei Yisrael, but it was nowhere near the kind of grand event as our Rebbe's wedding was. Our Rebbe got married in Warsaw. Warsaw was the Jerusalem of Poland. Warsaw had hundreds of thousands of Jews, including some of the greatest tzaddikim, the greatest Rebbes lived in Warsaw. And the Rebbe invited all of them to the wedding. The Frierdiker Rebbe invited all tzaddikim Poland to come to the wedding. And this was real, the Frierdiker Rebbe's hallo. Russian Chassidus and Polish Chassidus had been separated by borders and oppression. The Rebbe had come out of Russia, he was living in Poland, and this was his hallo to the Polish tzaddikim. Many Hasidic Rebbes came personally to participate in the Rebbe's wedding. The Radziner Rebbe was there, a lot of the Rebbes. Some didn't come personally, they sent shluchim. The Gerer Rebbe sent his brother. The Belzer Rebbe sent a shliach. But most of the Greiser Rebbes came to the Rebbe's wedding. The Rebbe's wedding was therefore a royal event. It was very, very grand. It was attended by some of the greatest Jewish leaders in Poland. Rabbi Menachem Zembe was at the Rebbe's chasana. Rabbi Meir Shapiro was at the Rebbe's chasana. The Rebbe got to know these people personally, and they also got to know the Rebbe personally. And for the Frierdiker, this was very, very important. Officially, the reason the wedding was so large is because the Frierdiker was introducing himself to lyhadus Poland, because the Frierdiker had 3 daughters, and you're not allowed to show deference to one over the next. I mean, I'm sure all the Frierdiker's daughters were wonderful, but only one of them was marrying a Rebbe. In other words, only one of them was a Rebbetzins. So the weddings were not the same. But the official reason for why the Rebbe's wedding was so large was because it was introduction to lyhadus Poland, but it was important for the Frierdiker Rebbe that they should meet the Rebbe. And when they met the Rebbe, they were overwhelmed. When the Polish Rebbes met the Rebbe, they were absolutely overwhelmed. And a lot of them would remember that 30, 40, 50 years later when the Rebbe became a Rebbe. They would remember the young man that they met by the chasna. The Rebbe's presence was extraordinary. It was incredibly impressive. In any case, the wedding started in Riga because you have an ufruf. The Shabbos for the chasna was an ufruf. The girls, the women, left before Shabbos. The Rebbe Achei Mushka and her older sister Chana was married already, and the Rebbe Medina and the Rebbe Sara and the younger sister Shandel, they left before Shabbos. They went to Poland for Shabbos because they had to buy clothing for the wedding and for the Sheva Brachas, and there was apparently places to buy better clothing in Poland than in Latvia. Hard to imagine, but that was the fact. So the men stayed behind, and the Ufruf was in Riga. The Rebbe Zagazuz and our Rebbe was called in the Frierdiker Rebbe Shul in Riga. There was a big Kiddush that Shabbos. And the Rebbe said, the Maimer is printed, in which he explains the idea of Aliyah L'Torah. Oh, I forgot something important. There is a tradition that you girls are not going to notice until you're marrying off your own children. That's called Tnoim. Tnoim is that by the Kabbalah's Ponim, they read a note of conditions that the 2 sides make. And then the custom is that the mothers of the chasna and the kala break a plate. What you don't understand is that piece of paper, by the time it's written and read, is obsolete. Because the Tanoim is supposed to make it the beginning of the engagement. When a boy and a girl get engaged, the parents have to agree to what they're obligating themselves. In other words, in the olden days, Chos and a Kala became engaged, the parents sat down and said, okay, I'm going to give this, and you're going to give this. They wrote down on a paper. And you had to meet the Tnoim. If you didn't give everything you promised, they could take you to Bezdin. And it was very, very complicated. So Tnoim became a big obstacle, because oftentimes people would make conditions and they couldn't keep them. And weddings, and there was a curse in the Tnoim, there was a Achei Temimim, don't ask. So really the Tnoim should really be abolished completely, The tradition, we don't want to give away a minig Yisrael, so our custom is by the Kabbalah Sponim, the Tnoim are written, and it's all about the conditions that are supposed to take place during the engagement, and it's about a half an hour before the wedding they read the Tnoim, but in the olden days the Tnoim were made when Chassidus became engaged. In the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins Tnoim were also made before the wedding, but not 6 years before their wedding, 6 days before their wedding. The Rebbe got married Tuesday Yidal Kislev. The Tnoim were made on Vav Kislev, 8 days before the wedding. The Rebbe sat down and wrote Tnoim. The Friedrich Rebbe did, and he wrote a letter to Chaim Mushka, Rebbe Chaim Mushka, which is printed in Niggas Kaddish. Mazel Tov. Today we made Tnoim, and we made a kinyan, and we broke a plate, and so on. We didn't know this till recently that the Rebbe and the Rebbe's Tnoim were made on Vav Kislev. The reason this is important to me is because that is my wedding anniversary. Vav Kislev. So after the fact, it became, you see, I got married on a special day, except when I got married, I had no idea that it was special. After Shabbos, the Rebbe, the men's contingent, left Riga and they went to Poland. Now, one of the sad pieces of the story is that there were Lubavitcher Hasidim who had just come out of Russia, who were in Riga, who were not allowed into Poland. The Rebbe's personal secretary, Machon Fagin, had already left Russia, and the Polish government would not let him into the country. He missed the Rebbe's chasana because the Polish government did not give him a rights to enter into the country. The Friedrich Rebbe came on a train together with the Rebbe and a whole bunch of mechubadim, and there's a wonderful letter which is printed now in Igros Kodesh from a Yid by the name of Achei Temimim. Achei Temimim was a Nikolayev. Does anybody know the significance of that? The Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. Achei Temimim was by the Rebbe's bris. Achei Temimim was by the Rebbe's opsher. He knew the Rebbe as a child. He was now a senior chassid, very close to Friedrich Rebbe. He was so, the Friedrich Rebbe calls him Yedid Nefesh, Yedid Beis Rebbe. He's so close to Friedrich Rebbe. He was older than the Friedrich Rebbe. He was an old man. You girls know about Achei Temimim, yeah? So they had the royim, you know that term royim? That they didn't have mashpiyim, they had the royim. That's the term that Rebbe used. One of the royim of Achei Temimim was this Achei Temimim. He was unfortunately killed by the Nazis. He was a very special chassid, a very hard-ticking chassid. He knew the Rebbe from childhood. He was the Rebbe's shomer. He followed the Rebbe around for the last couple of days before the wedding. So he writes intimately, hour by hour, the time that he spent with the young chassid, with our Rebbe. He wrote these letters to his children who were still living in Russia, so they should have some idea what was going on by the Rebbe. He wrote two beautiful, beautiful letters. One he wrote in conjunction with the Chasaneh, and the other one he wrote in conjunction with Tishrei Tafresh Tzadik, that the Friedrich Rebbe was in America, so our Rebbe acted in lieu of the Rebbe in Riga, and he was there. He describes that whole Tishrei. So he was the Rebbe's shomer. So they arrived in Poland on Sunday night. The Friedrich Rebbe got off the train, and there were hundreds of photographers, and you know how many Yiddish newspapers there were in Warsaw in 1929? If you tell me there were 40 or 50, it wouldn't be an exaggeration. In those days, everybody read newspapers. Today, nobody even knows what paper is. In those days, there were newspapers. There were all these papers in Yiddish and Polish and whatever it was. And the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe is coming to Poland. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was so famous. He was the Jew who defeated Stalin and on and on. The Friedrich Rebbe got out of the train and he had to stand and pose for pictures and answer questions. The Rebbe and the Achei snuck out of the train station. Literally snuck out of the train station before people could catch them. The Rebbe was not on display. The Rebbe didn't have to stand there and pose for pictures. He was only the chassan. The Rebbe had, quote, better things to do. And him and Achei describes them sneaking away. And what happened was they went to the wrong hotel. they went to the hotel where they were supposed to go. They ended up in the wrong hotel. Their bags went to one hotel. They went to a different hotel. They ended up paying for more than one hotel. I mean, the whole thing was a couple of nights. Once the Rebbe got married, obviously he went to the same hotel where the Friedrich Rebbe was. But Achei describes being with the Rebbe the last couple of days. And throughout his writing, you have these musings. He's talking to himself. And he's writing, we know this Mendel when he was a little boy. He uses the word Mendel. And he was so pure, and he was so holy, and he was so intelligent. But now he's faced the big world. The Rebbe had already then. Before, in Russia, the Rebbe had gone to college. In Leningrad, and then in Berlin. And he writes, is it the same Mendel? Is it the same Mendel? And then he describes the Rebbe getting ready for his chasana. The way the Rebbe did mincha, and the way the Rebbe did tshuva, and the way the Rebbe cried. And he finishes, it's the same Mendel that we knew as children in Nikolaev. This is one of his musings. Another one of his musings that you have in this letter is, I'm standing and I'm watching this young man get ready for his chasana. To the daughter of everything that is precious to us. He keeps referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Kol hayakar lanu, anything which is precious to us. And I'm standing, watching this young man getting ready to go to the chuppah with the daughter of all that is precious to us. And I'm asking myself, how much of my future and your future is bound up in this young man? He's talking about, what would be, and he's correct, but he describes it very emotionally. How much of the future, your future, my future, our children, your children, are bound up in this young man who's getting ready to go to his chuppah. And of course, that's the way it would play out. He describes asking the Rebbe to lay down. The Rebbe refused. They wouldn't rest for a minute. He spent the entire day learning the Reishis Chochmah, the day of his wedding. Now the wedding was supposed to start early. The wedding was called like 3-4 o'clock, supposed to be the chuppah. Lepoile was very, very late. The Rebbe's wedding, Lepoile, ended up being like 7 o'clock. The chuppah was much later than scheduled. Now you have to understand, Poland, Varsha, had hundreds of thousands of Jews. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And a good percentage of them called themselves Chassidim. So you had a lot of curious onlookers. Hundreds of thousands of people came to watch the chuppah. They wanted to see what goes on Lubavitch. This was a Chassidish chasna. Everybody went. The only way to make the wedding orderly was you had to have tickets. To get into the wedding, you needed a ticket. And there were different tickets. Why? Because the Chelek HaRuchni of the chasna, the Kabbal's Ponim and the chuppah took place in the yeshiva. There was Achei Temimim in Varsha, which was probably a small building. The dinner and the dancing took place in a hall. So when you were invited to the wedding, if you got invitations to the Frierdiker Rebbe's chasna, depending on who you were, you got, I think, 1, 2, or 3 tickets. If you got 1 ticket, you were invited to one part of the wedding. Let's say the dancing at the end of the wedding, what we would call today Simchas Chasna V'Kala. If you got 2 tickets, that means you were invited to Simchas Chasna V'Kala and the Sudas Chasna, the dinner. If you got 3 tickets, 3 different tickets, you were invited to the Simchas Chasna V'Kala, to the Sudas Chasna, and to the Kabbalah's Ponim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe decided who he invited to his wedding. And Chassidim, Lubavitcher Chassidim, who were out of Russia, got personal invitations to the Frierdiker Rebbe with tickets. Right? There was a Yid named Yechanan Gordon who describes being at the wedding. He got 3 tickets. He was at the Kabbalah's Ponim, he was at the Sudas Chasna, and he was at the Simchas Chasna. And everybody got tickets based on when, I'm sure there wasn't enough room for all the people, certainly at the Kabbalah's Ponim. And police stood at the door and checked your tickets. I'm sure there were many people who snuck in anyway, but Polish policemen were commissioned, maybe they were paid, to make sure that there was order. The Kala was in one room, the Chasam was in another. And the Chaim Altis was an old man, so he made the terrible Aveda to go look at the Kala. And he describes in his letter how she looked. They made a garden, an indoor garden with waterfalls. He describes it very elegant, very, very articulately. You could see that he has a feel for it. The Kala's room, it was part of the yeshiva, was made to look like a garden. It was inside with a waterfall and trees. It was beautiful. And he just, Elichaim Altois was his name. You can read this letter. It's printed in English, Kodesh, and I'm sure it's been translated into English. It's very interesting. He describes how the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka looked. I mean, he was a Chassidish Yid. I guarantee you he wasn't a person who went to the women's section with the wrong machshavas. He wanted to see the Frierdiker Rebbe's daughter. And he describes to his children in Russia how it looked. And the chasam was in another room. And of course, the Frierdiker Rebbe got up by the Kabbalah's Ponim. And he said a famous paragraph. It's very, very famous, which we all know. And we all, at least a lot of us, repeat it by our own weddings. It begins with the words Yaduo Mefursim. Yaduo Mefursim means it's known and it's famous. That by every single chasana, 3 generations of ancestors come to participate in the wedding. That means the parents and grandparents, and I guess great-grandparents. And the Rebbe said, this is by everybody. And by some people, it's more and even more. So b'meila, I'm going to say a Chassidus, the Frierdiker Rebbe, I'm going to say a Maimed Chassidus. In this Maimed, there's going to be a piece from my father, a piece from my grandfather, a piece from my great-grandfather, the great-great-grandfather of the Chassan, a piece from the Mittel Rebbe, a piece from the Alter Rebbe. And then he finished with the words, when you say Torah from a Rebbe and you say it in his name, it should be as if you see him. When the Friedrich Rebbe used to say that, Maimon Chazal, there was an understanding that the Friedrich Rebbe could see them physically. When the Rebbe used to quote that Maimon Chazal, there was an understanding that he actually saw them in the room. And then the Friedrich Rebbe said the Maimon Lochodei Likas, which is a relatively short Maimon. Then after the Maimon, they went to the Badeken. Now the Rebbe's parents were not at the wedding. The Rebbe's parents were not allowed to come to the wedding. One of the reasons the Rebbe's wedding kept getting delayed, I told the girls in the other group, there were 3 reasons why the wedding was delayed. One of the reasons was because they were hoping that the Rebbe's parents would be given permission to leave Russia for the wedding. And the government said no. They kept on trying. Eventually they gave up and they finally set a date for the wedding more than a year after the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins and the Mishpacha had left Russia. So who was the Unterfeder on the Chassan's tzad? And this is interesting. This is very interesting. The Friedrich Rebbe's Shver and Shvigi were present. The Rebbetzin and Chamadina's parents were at the wedding. The Rebbetzin and Chamadina's father and mother. His name was Avram Shneerson, and her name I think was Chave. They lived in Nezhin. They were at the wedding, but they were not the Unterfeders. Who was the Unterfeders for the Rebbe? Moshe HaKoyen Horenstein. Moshe HaKoyen Horenstein was married to a daughter of the Rebbe Marash. In other words, he was the Friedrich Rebbe's uncle. And his wife was the Friedrich Rebbe's aunt, the Rebbe Rashab's younger sister. Their son, Mendel Horenstein, would later marry the Friedrich Rebbe's youngest daughter, Shendel. Moshe HaKoyen Horenstein were the other Unterfeders. Okay, and by the way, from what I understand, that when the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin went to her chuppah, they went as a couple. In other words, when the Rebbe went to the chuppah, he was taken by 2 men. When the Rebbe's Achei Temimim was taken to the chuppah, the Friedrich Rebbe went back and took her. In other words, even though Shoshvini means 2 couples, a man and a woman, and by us it's the 2 men lead the chassan and the 2 women lead the kala, the Friedrich Rebbe went back to lead the Rebbe's Achei Temimim to the chuppah, and Mrs. Sternberg, said that the Rebbetzin told her, I can still feel the way my father was holding my hand. That they walked down steps, and she couldn't see where she was walking. And the Rebbe was holding her so she shouldn't fall. So the Rebbe's Achei Temimim would say, Ich kann nicht halt fühlen dem Taten's hand. I could still feel how my father held me. The Rebbe's Achei Temimim would say that 40 years after her wedding, 50 years after her wedding. I can still feel how my father held me. They took me to the chuppah. So this is interesting. In other words, in that wedding, it sort of seems that the Shoshvini should be couples, not like we do it. A father and a mother should take a chassan to the chuppah, a father and a mother take a kala to the chuppah, which is not how we do it. But this is what happened. Give me 1 minute and I'll let you talk. The Rebbe went with Moshe Horenstein into the kala section and they did the badeken. And after the badeken, they went into a private room. I'm going to get to this in a moment. Just go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask why you don't do like that.
Some people do, some people don't.
Why like the general adoption?
I honestly do not know the answer. I'm assuming it's tradition. You do what your parents did, you know. My father was taken to the chuppah by 2 men. My father's mother was not at his wedding. My father's mother had passed away. And my mother was taken, both her parents, by her mother and her shviger, because that's how their parents did it. It's very possible that someone decided at some point that we need a higher standard of tznius. But I've seen many Lubavitcher weddings, in the Gerari Mishpacha. And Geraris are a substantial portion of Lubavitch. They all do couples. The Gerari Mishpacha, it's always a father and a mother leading a chassan to the chuppah and so on. Even videos of the chasnas with the Rebbe himself beside the Gedushin, you see that in that family, they go to the chuppah couples, not 2 men and 2 women. I really don't know. I mean, if I'm going to keep on talking, I'm not going to come up with a better answer. Go ahead.
How was Rebbetzin described in the letter?
Obviously beautiful. He describes her as being pale. Her face was angelic, white. I'm assuming it had to do with the makeup that she was wearing, but that's how he describes her. The picture that you see, she's pale. The picture in the hallway is from her wedding. You know, in the hallway there's hanging a picture of the Rebbetzin, that's from the day of her chasana. That's her wedding dress.
Did she wear three?
Several different dresses, but she didn't wear white. The Rabbeim didn't wear white. The Beis Rivka didn't wear white. He described as being pale. I'd be so much more comfortable if you would ask a woman that question rather than a man. But you could read the letter inside. He describes her as pale. very white. He describes her beautifully, but this is the specific characteristic that you're asking me about. That she was very. She looked again. I'm assuming it's from the makeup. She was whitish, but I don't know what that means. Then they went into a private room. The Rebbe, the Frierdiker, and the Rebbe went to a private room to get ready for the chuppah. At first, a whole bunch of people went in, and then the Frierdiker told most of the people to leave. You know what happens, right? A chassan, before a chuppah, you have to untie all of it. You untie his shoes. You don't have any knots. Even the gartel is untied. The tie is undone. No knots. I don't know why, but that's a fit, mezach. And then you have to dress him. You put on a kittel. On top of his kaput, he puts on a kittel. So the Frierdiker Rebbe put the kittel on the Rebbe, then he put the gartel on the Rebbe. And when he put the gartel on the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to the Rebbe, I should really make a bracha. Oizer Yisrael begavura, to girdle Israel with strength in the morning. One of the brachas we make every single morning is a bracha for the gartel. Oizer Yisrael begavura. Said the Frierdiker Rebbe, but I can't because I already made the bracha in the morning. But, and he said in Yiddish, mit dem bin dich zu mich mich zu dir bezeh ubava. With this gartel, I'm tying you to me and me to you in this world and in the next world. It was a very dramatic moment. There were two witnesses. His father-in-law, Rabbi Avraham Shneisen, was a witness, and also the same Elechayim was there. The Frierdiker told the Rebbe before his chuppah that he's tying him to him with the gartel. Now, the reason this is significant, and this is hard to prove, but it's my belief, is because there's a whole long history about gartlach. When the Mittler Rebbe was a child, the Alter Rebbe gave him a gartel. He didn't give it to his other sons. When the Tzemach Tzedek was a child, the Alter Rebbe gave him a gartel. He didn't give it to his other grandsons. When the Rebbe Marash was a child, the Tzemach Tzedek gave him a gartel. He didn't give it to his other children. When the Rebbe Rashab was a child, the Rebbe Marash gave him a gartel and didn't give it to his other children. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe was 11, he got a gartel from his father. And when he got that gartel, he told his mother, the Rebbetzin Rivka, I'm thinking to give the Frierdiker Rebbe a gartel. So she said to him, Azevi de tata hadir gegeben, the way your father gave you a gartel. And the Rebbe Rashab said, Azevi de tata hat mir gegeben. There was an idea that every Rebbe gave the next Rebbe a gartel. None of the other children. The Rebbe never got such a gartel. So I read between the lines, although there's a lot of guessing, a lot of making it up, that the gartel which the Rebbe gave the Rebbe before the chuppah was much more than a gartel. It meant something much deeper. And then they went to the chuppah. The chuppah was in the courtyard of the yeshiva. And L'chaim Alter describes, he was such a miyuchas. He was the Rebbe's shoyman. He sat at the head table. But when it came to the chuppah, it was a free-for-all. It was outside. He says, I was old. I couldn't push. I was quickly pushed out. I couldn't see anything. He was a very important member of the wedding. He was a friend of the mishpacha mamish. But by the chuppah, there were no tickets. The chuppah was outside. He says, I found myself, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear. The Rebbe went, the Frierdiker went to the chuppah with the Rebbe. And again, the other Shushvin was a Moshe Achei in Holstein. He was the Frierdiker's uncle through marriage. They brought the Rebbe to the chuppah. Then the Frierdiker went back and took the Rebbetzin with the Rebbetzin Nechamadina. And again, I'm assuming that the other Shushvin, he says, the Musya, the Moshe Holstein's wife, the Frierdiker's aunt, who was the Rebbe Marashot, her name was Chaya Mushka, she was also there, and they brought the Rebbetzin to the chuppah. So he writes, Al-Chaim writes, that the whole time the Frierdiker was singing the Alter Rebbe's Nigun. The Frierdiker was sang Alter Rebbe's Nigun with Gvaldik Hisrakshas. They got to the chuppah, they got to the Makam HaChuppah, and it says who read the Ksubah and who sang Miyadir, but the Frierdiker basically did everything. The Frierdiker did the Siddur Kedushin and all the Sheva Brachas. The Frierdiker did everything himself. And Al-Chaim says, I couldn't see the Rebbe, but I heard his voice. And I swear that as the Rebbe said the Sheva Brachas, I heard the voice of the Rebbe. You understand? Al-Chaim says, I couldn't see, but I could hear, and I swear that when the Rebbe said the Sheva Brachas, I heard the voice of the Rebbe. Do you understand what I just said? He said he heard the voice of the Rebbe Rashab. That when he heard the Frierdiker Rebbe saying the Sheva Brachas, he heard the voice of his father, the Rebbe Rashab. Which reminds me of another important detail about the chasana which people don't pay attention to. Do you know, and I'm going to say you don't know this, that the Rebbe Marash said to the Rebbe Rashab, a shtraimel you wear only in Lubavitch. No. The Rebbe Marash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, told the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, a shtraimel you wear only in Lubavitch. When the Rebbe Rashab traveled, he did not wear shtraimel on Shabbos and Yom Tov. When the Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch at Tofrei Shayavov at the end of 1915, he never put on a shleimer for the rest of his life. When the Rebbe Rashab lived in Astov, he wore a shlape, a hat like this, with the brim up, maybe it didn't have pinches. The Rebbe Rashab did not wear a shleimer after he left Lubavitch. The Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe, he didn't put on a shleimer. You never knew this. The Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe with a hat, Nebuch. When did the Frierdiker put on a shleimer the first time as a Rebbe? By our Rebbe's chasana. To our Rebbe's chasana, the Frierdiker comes to put on a shleimer. Now, Achitzin would say that since he was doing it in Poland, and all the Polish Rebbes were going to be there, it wouldn't have looked right if he didn't go with a shleimer. I'm sure there's a yon in Pnimium. The fact was, the first time that Frierdiker put on a shleimer was to our Rebbe's wedding, and later on he told the Rebbe an interesting thing, that a few weeks after the chasana, the Frierdiker had a dream, and he saw his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab told him, quote, a dank for an Hitler. Thank you for the hat. Thank you for putting on a shleimer. And the Frierdiker told the Rebbe that by your chasana, I decided to put on a shleimer. I wanted to wear my father's, the Rebbe Rashab's, but I couldn't. So I put on my Zaydas. The Frierdiker couldn't put on his father's hat. It was too hard for him. The shleimer which the Frierdiker wore, what they call a spadik, the fur hat with the white line running through the middle of it, was the shleimer of the Rebbe Marash, of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Zayda. That's what he put on by the Rebbe's chasna. That's what he wore for the duration of his physical life, wore a shleimer. And it was a big chiddush, a shleimer outside Lubavitch. And of course the Rebbe never put on a shleimer in the first place. Now, the Rebbe wore his hat down, like this. And he walked around with white silk gloves. I think even by his chasna he had gloves. He was shaking people's hands with gloves. He looked like a French gentleman, not like a Hasidic Eidim. The Rebbe's chitzonius did a look at nicht gestimmt. But when he opened his mouth and Torah started coming out, he blew people away. The Rebbe's presence was extraordinary. And Bechlal, the Rebbe's eyes, I'm sure you've heard about the Rebbe's eyes. The Rebbe's eyes were something else. The Rebbe looked at you and he would burn through you like a fire. I know the experience. I had it happen to me many times. You couldn't believe a human being to have such eyes. I have eyes. My father has eyes. My wife has eyes. My children have eyes. I look into their eyes. Nothing happens. The Rebbe's eyes were a physical force. They were physical, like electricity. Zoop. And he had those eyes when he got married too. He didn't get those eyes when he got older. He had those eyes. The eyes. Talk about eyes being a window to the soul. In the case of the Rebbe, it was a very, very plain and obvious thing. Now, wait. Listen to me. The Chelek HaRuchni of the Chasana took place in the yeshiva. The yeshiva's Temchatim in Varsha, the Rebbe wanted, the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted that the Chelek HaRuchni should be in the yeshiva. So the Kabbal's Panim and the Chup was in the Chelek HaRuchni in the yeshiva. Then the family members went to the hotel to rest. And there was a break of several hours. Everything was delayed anyway. It was supposed to start at like 4:30, started like 6:30, 7:30. Everything was very delayed. I don't know the reason, but there's reasons. And then they went to the dinner. The dinner took place in a hall, a big hall that could accommodate many people. And of course the Mechutanim arrived, and the Chazan Kala arrived, and there was a wedding. They served a meal. During the meal, it was by invitation only. The Bachrim from Achei Temimim in Varsha were invited to the Chasana. If you learned the Temimim in Varsha, you went to the Chasana, the back table belonged to the Bachrim. And during the dinner, what I'm trying to explain to you, there was a dinner, and then they bench, and then they had a whole night of dancing. It's two separate ceremonies. During the dinner, with by invitation only, the Frierdiker took a towel, put it on his left hand, like a waiter, and he held a tray. In the tray, he had a bunch of shot glasses, and he held a bottle of mashke, and he would fill up the glasses, and he went from table to table. Imagine that everyone is sitting, and the Rebbe is walking around like a waiter, saying l'chaim with all of the guests. And it was so heartfelt, and it was so intimate, and it was so full of joy. Yechon and Gordon was at that wedding. And he says to Yisrael Gordon, who describes it in the videos, the Rebbe was so happy, the Frierdiker Rebbe was so joyous. It was like, wow. The elation, the Frierdiker Rebbe was like walking on water. You saw the Frierdiker Rebbe, you never saw a man happier than this. He was so happy at the Rebbe's chasana, it's indescribable. And the result of this happiness was an overflowing of brachas. He just showered people with brachas. He went from table to table. People sat, and the Rebbe walked around. The Frierdiker Rebbe walked around. I guess he had to have an assistant, because when they took the glasses off the tray, someone had to put new glasses on the tray, and I'm assuming they didn't use plastic. They probably used real glass. He would reload the tray, and the Rebbe would fill up all the glasses, and he would give everybody l'chaim, and each one would get a bracha from the Rebbe for what they needed, from table to table. And our Rebbe, our Rebbe said, I was sitting at the head table, and suddenly the Rebbe, the Shver, gets a chashtal avek. This is before the dancing, this is at the dinner. The Frierdiker Rebbe gets up, and he starts to go around to give mashkes. I thought to myself, the Rebbe is going to stand, how can I sit? So I got up to go and help. Maybe I'll hold a bottle, maybe I'll hold... And the Rebbe, you cooked for you, turn around with his eyes, saying, you're the chassan, tonight you're the king, sit. So the Rebbe said, so I remained sitting on my seat, but I was very uncomfortable. And the Frierdiker went to all the tables, every single table, said l'chaim to every guest. Until the Rebbe came and sat back down and continued the simcha of the chasana. The last group of people the Rebbe went over to was the Bachrim. The Bachrim were at the back of the hall, and the Rebbe said to the Bachrim, your l'chaim I'm not going to give to you directly. Your l'chaim I'm going to give to you a mashpiyim. And mashpiyim are going to give it to l'chaim. And the mashpiyim then, I think Rabbi Alter Simchovich was their mashpiyah then. They had good to mashpiyim, good to mashpiyim. They were good to Bachrim. You realize that the Rebbe's wedding is over 90 years ago, right? It's 92 years ago to be exact. It's a long time ago. And the Rebbe said a short sikha to the Bachrim. He told them, Ein ha-teira miskayemis. Adam told them, Ein ha-teira miskayemis, el b'misha memis atmi Allah. The teira does not last unless you're meisa nefesh. You kill yourself with the teira. And he encouraged the Bachrim to learn teira basmar doshkidim. During that wedding hall, during that dinner, at some point, the Frierdiker Rebbe said loud, as biti nosati leish. It's a pasuk in Chumash. As biti nosati leish hazeh. But the Rebbe just said the first part. I gave my daughter to a ish, to a man. The Frierdiker Rebbe had 3 daughters. I don't think he said it by all 3 chasanas. You understand? As biti nosati leish. I have given my daughter to an ish. The Rebbe's father heard about this, and he wrote the Rebbe and said, I want you to tell me every single nice thing the Frierdiker Rebbe said about you. I'm your father and I have a right to know. I don't know if the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe during that week made comments showing the pride that he felt that he took the Rebbe for an Edom, took the Rebbe's Zogazunz, and our Rebbe, at that point, it was for a son-in-law. Now at one point they benched, and after benching there were new guests who got the 3rd tickets. We would call Teres Simchas Makala, went our whole night, they danced till the morning. During that night, a lot of the Polish Rebbes came. Yechon and Gordon remembered, he described it, a dance of Rebbes. Now, today a dance of Rebbes just means Chassidim who don't forget to brush their beard on that particular day. But in Poland, 90 years ago, there were big tzaddikim, emes tzaddikim. And he said, Yechon said, watching the Frierdiker Rebbe dance with other tzaddikim, I'm not chas v'shalom comparing other tzaddikim to Frierdiker Rebbe, but you could see holiness. You could see that this was different. This was holy people dance in a holy way, and the whole ring of Rebbes, they danced together. They participated they came to the chasen, and they danced the whole night. Fartog, the Rebbe said a maimer, another maimer, second maimer, Asher Baras Asam V'Simcha Chasam V'Kala, which is printed, of course, in the Derusha Chasene, and that's the story of the wedding itself. The next day, there was a minig in Poland, which was called Sudas Aniyim. It's a good thing to do, you should know. Sudas Aniyim means a feast to invite poor people to a wedding. Today, somebody told me, Yes's name told me, Jens Hackner told me, you have to hang up a wedding invitation in 770. I said, why? Because you need to have people by your wedding who are not invited. That's what he told me. You have to hang up a wedding invitation. You have to have poor by your wedding. You can't make a chasna and not have shnara sitting eating your chicken. It's true. It's a correct. He's right. He's really right. I know, but the wedding invitations bring them. He was saying that it's negeya. It's negeya the schus of the chosna and kala to have people like that at the wedding. And but in Poland they made a special meal. The next day was a dinner, pashut, and I think the Frierdiker Rebbe participated, and hundreds of people who were poor came, and it was one of the things you did when you made a wedding. You made a sudas. It's very, very embarrassing for them. You know what's even more embarrassing? Being hungry. This was the tradition. You know, we're coming from Thanksgiving. Yeah? In America, the president goes and he goes to a homeless shelter and he gives people food. It's embarrassing for them too, right? But what's more embarrassing, they should go hungry. Unfortunately, there's poverty in the world. And there's a minig yisol teiri, when you make a simcha for yourself, you shouldn't forget what the Gemara says, my four, the Gad, and the Yosem, and the Almona, and the Levi. You have the Ben, and the Bas, and you have your four, and I have my four. The Eibusha says, you look after my four, and I'll look after your four. Which is the Yosem, and the Almona, the orphan, and the widow, and the convert, and the Oni, the poor person. So in those days, it was part of the tradition to make a Nacha Chassid, the Nacha Suda, a Suda Saniyim. Now there's more to the story, which I'm going to tell tomorrow at 1 o'clock. If you want, send me an email after tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I'll try to send it to you. Good day. Thank you all for coming and listening. Yes. So you're always round 3. Whenever we do whatever they call it, when Yonah de Yoima, so Monday I do seminary Beis and then seminary Aleph 2, and you get the third part of every story. Somebody's complaining that it's already in the past. But I did 2 parts yesterday on the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins Chasane, and I am repeating again. If anybody's interested, send me an email, and I will send you the entire the audio collection. I'm actually so now like I said, if anybody wants the whole story, send me an email. I'll send you all 3 parts. I gave the first group the background before the wedding. Yesterday, the second group, I talked about the wedding itself. And there's a few things that I want to talk to you about that I didn't talk about to them. First of all, the guests that came to the Rebbe's Chasana, some of them were very important people. And there's some stories, not a lot, but there are some stories that are known about the Rebbe's Chasana that I think are worth repeating, because I think they have ripples in one way or another. Number one, as far as I know, the Gerei Rebbe did not go to the Rebbe's Chasana. The Gerei Rebbe lived in Vasha, did not attend the Rebbe's Chasana, but he sent his brother and I think some of his children to the wedding. They would become the Gerei Rebbes after the war. And it's a funny story. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm doing it. The Gerei Rebbe then and the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't see eye to eye. There was unpleasantness between them. But the children of the Gerei Rebbe and our Rebbe were very close friends. They really were very close. And there's only 2 ways of explaining why it is that the children of the Gerei Rebbe didn't get so along with the Frierdiker Rebbe, got so along with the Rebbe. There's 2 answers. Number one, that the Rebbe was a kid, a 14-year-old. Their uncle, Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, was in Yekaterinoslav, and he tested the Rebbe as a 14-year-old, and he told Rabbi Leivik, Se 14 Jahre, 14 years old. Bei Insen Poilen and das nicht du. To be 14 and to know as much as the Rebbe knows. He met the Rebbe as a boy and he never forgot it. Or on the second explanation for why there was such a kiruvah between the Rebbe and the Gerei Rebbes is because they met the Rebbe at the Chassaneh. So I'm just mentioning it because I think this is significant. There were other famous personalities. The Rebbe, some great Rebbes came to the Chassaneh, but amongst the people at the Rebbe's wedding was the Meir Shapiro. If you were not a Lubavitcher, you would know that name well, but part of our brainwashing is what we don't know. The Meir Shapiro was a very important Jew in the pre-war world. He was the Rav of Lublin. He was a Gadol. He passed away at 47. He was a Gaon Olam, incredible genius of Torah. One of the tragedies of Meir Shapiro's life, besides that he passed away so young, is that he never had any children. He sat in the Polish parliament on behalf of Agudas Yisrael. He was a brilliant orator, great speaker, he had incredible presence. And the Rebbe, our Rebbe, said about the Meir Shapiro, Ich hab ihm gekent, I knew him, und is given Gor Achsidish Yid. The Rebbe doesn't use these words lightly. The Rebbe said, I knew him, and he was a very, very Achsidish Yid. He wasn't a Lubavitcher, he was a Poilishe. He was a Chartke B'Chassid, which is Ruzhin, and again, if you understand demographics, this is really a Russian Chassidus, which explains why they would have more in common with us. But the Rebbe referred to him as a Gor Achsidish Yid, and he was by the Rebbe's wedding. Once in a Fabrengen, the Rebbe quoted his Sefer, Shal Tshuvas Eira Meir, and the Rebbe laughed. He quoted the Sefer by name, and he laughed. It was on the Shecheshes I made of Kapkiyas. Don't suspect me of being a big bucky, of knowing everything, and everyone. No one's Cheshish that have a big Bekiyas. The Rebbe is notorious. The Rebbe is famous for the Bekiyas. The biggest Misnagdim knew that if the Rebbe doesn't have a source, the source doesn't exist. But the Rebbe said with a chuckle, he came to my wedding, And this is the wedding gift that he gave me. So Mel, I learned it through. So the Rebbe quoted in a Rashi Sikha inside the tape, it was in Lamites, the Rebbe quoted Eramir. So the story goes that the Meir Shapiro, his contribution to the Jewish worlds are famous. He made the Daf HaYomi. It was his contribution. Yeah, of course. The Rebbe said once he surprised how embraced it was by the Misnagdim because it was made by the Meir Shapiro. That was the context. That's when the Rebbe said it. And he made Yeshivas Chacham in Lublin. He made the yeshiva in Lublin, where to get into the yeshiva you had to know by heart 300 Lat Gemara. It was a very high level of learning. And it was a Chassidish yeshiva where there was a lot of emphasis on Torah. It was his brainchild. Unfortunately, he passed away. He went to America. He raised money to build the building. The building was put up probably in 1929. He passed away in 1933. His end is very tragic. He got sick and he died. It was really strange. He was a Chartkever Chassid, and he had a Chartkever Rebbe, and the Chartkever Rebbe put him in his place. He was a god. Lameshwa was an extraordinary man, and the Rebbe knew him. He was at the Rebbe's wedding, so the Frierdiker Rebbe sat him down next to the Rebbe at the Chasana. I don't know at what point, but he put him next to the Rebbe. Now, the Rebbe wore his hat down, you understand, and he wore white gloves. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that by the wedding he was wearing gloves. And people said the reason the Rebbe wore gloves, he didn't want to shake people's hand in case the hands were not clean. The Rebbe used to shake people's hands with a glove, always. He didn't take his glove off. He would shake your hand with the glove. In America, when you shake someone's hand, you take your glove off. The Rebbe wore thin white silk gloves, and he would shake people's hands with the gloves on. The Rebbe didn't want to touch people. The Rebbe's not Einer, the tzaddik. No, Yechidus, Bechlal, the Rebbe didn't shake people. I'm talking before the Rebbe was Rebbe. After the Rebbe was Rebbe, the Rebbe didn't wear gloves. And he looked like a French gentleman, you know. He was wearing a kapota, versteht sich. But everybody knew about the Goin. Everyone heard that this young man is a Ilu She'enko Meyo. So the Meir Shapiro sits down next to the Rebbe and he starts to talk to him, and the Rebbe's not saying a word. He's talking and he's talking, and the Rebbe's listening. So at a certain point, he leaned over the Rebbe, and he said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was sitting on the other side of the Rebbe, Zuk Gwinish. He doesn't say a word. So the Frierdiker Rebbe turned to the Rebbe and he said, Zog, speak. They talked for 45 minutes. At the end of the conversation, the Meir Shapiro says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, Lubavitch Rebbe, Iretzachkenuman an Edim Ago Anoilam. Lubavitch Rebbe, you took a son-in-law, Ago Anoilam, a world-class God. He was overwhelmed. Another story which is quite famous is a story with Rabbi Menachem Zembe. It's a story that spans 60 years. I'm sure you've heard the story that Rabbi Menachem Zembe was a big Gerach Chassid. He came to the Chasana and he took along a nephew. His name was Greenwald. And the next day he went in to speak to the Rebbe in learning, and the Rebbe turned to the nephew and he told him the Dvar Teire about Chanukah Licht. Do you know that story? Your story with the Chanukah Licht, that happened by the Chasana. Why the fifth Lichtele, you make such a big deal out of it. That happened. That famous story happened by it started by the Chasana, whether you're in Varsha or you're in London, and then you're in New York or in London, Toronto, and it's a story that it would play itself out 50 years later about the koyach of the fifth Lichtele. That story happened by the Rebbe's Chasana. The Menachem Zembe was also at the Rebbe's wedding, and there were other Gedalim who came to the Chasana. This guy Greenwald was about 14. He was an Yosef. He had no parents, so Menachem Zembe was his uncle. So he became Menachem Zembe's Shamish. That's the story. So the Menachem Zembe, Menachem was a Goan Oilam, was in the great Goan of was a Gerach Chassid. He was invited to the Rebbe's Chasana. He came to the Chasana. He talked to the Rebbe a little bit by the wedding, but there was no time. So he said to the Rebbe, "Can I come tomorrow to the hotel? We can schmooze a little." And he said, "But of course." So he came the next day. He took along his nephew, and the Rebbe and him talked and learned. The nephew had no idea what they were talking about. It was like way over his head. And after the conversation was finished, he tells the Rebbe, "This is my nephew. His name is Greenwald." He probably told him his first name as well. And he's helping me and so forth. And the Rebbe greeted him very warmly. And then the Rebbe told him that there's a minig Yisrael, wherever two Jews meet, you have to say Dvar Teire. So the Rebbe told him Dvar Teire. What was the Dvar Teire? Why do we make a very big deal out of the fifth Lichtele? We make a very big deal of the fifth night of Chanukah. And the answer is because the fifth night of Chanukah can never be Shabbos. Because it shows them the greatest darkness. And the message of the fifth Lichtele is that even a person who finds himself in the greatest darkness, the koyach of the Chanukah Licht can schlep a person out of darkness and bring him to a place of light. And then the Rebbe said, whether he lives in Varsha or he lives in London, the Chanukah Licht can have this effect on a person. That's the story. This Greenwald guy grew up, got married, had several children, and then the war came. Rebbe Nachum Zembe, by the way, was killed in the Warsaw ghetto. Rebbe Nachum Zembe himself was murdered in the Warsaw ghetto. This guy, Greenwald, he lost his wife and his kids in the war, but he survived. He came to America, and it was around 47, 48, he was getting married again. He was close to the Kloisenberger Rebbe, close to Satman, close to Kloisenberg, and people advised him that before his chassan, he should go into the Friedrich of Bracha. So at this point, if he was 14 in 1929, now you're talking, he was in his early 30s, he was not a boy. He went into the Friedrich Rebbe, he was a survivor, you understand yourself how warmly the Friedrich Rebbe greeted him, and then he gave him a bracha, and then he mentioned to the Friedrich Rebbe that he was by the chasna in Varsha. So the Rebbe says, my Nadim is done, my son-in-law is here, it's a good idea, you should go downstairs and tell him hello. So he goes downstairs, he goes into the Rebbe, as soon as the Rebbe sees him, the Rebbe says to him, 20 years passed, it's time that we should see each other again. He couldn't believe the Rebbe recognized him. And then they schmoozed in ahead, and then as he's about to leave, the Rebbe says, well, do you meet him, say Dvar Teire. And the Rebbe preached the same Dvar Teire again. Why do you make such a big deal out of the 5th Lichtale? And the answer is because the 5th day of Chanukah cannot be on Shabbos, which goes in the greatest darkness, and the koyach of the 5th Lichtale is they can schlep a Jew out of the greatest darkness and bring him back to the Eibishter. And the Rebbe said, whether he lives in New York or in London, the koyach of the Chanukah Licht can bring him back to the Eibishter. He was mishtoimim. It was very strange to him, this whole thing. 20 years passed. Now it's 1969. His son is getting married. He's living in Toronto, and he's a member of the Satmar community. And it was already after the 6-Day War. Satmar didn't hate us completely, but they hated us enough. He decides to come to New York to get a bracha from the Rebbe. So he comes to 770. He wants to go in right away. The Maskidim tell him, you're crazy. You didn't make an appointment. He says, listen, I know that I was by the Rebbe's wedding. By my chas, Rebbe gave me a bracha. I want a bracha for my son. So they said to him, you can go into the Rebbe on one condition. You get your bracha, you walk out, no questions, no requests, just a bracha. Fine. They walk into the Rebbe. As soon as the Rebbe sees him, the Rebbe says to him, no, 20 years pass. It's time to meet each other again. And again, he can't believe that the Rebbe recognizes him. And the Rebbe gives him a very warm bracha. And then he tells the Rebbe, I was told by the Maskidim that I'm not allowed to say anything. Can I ask the Rebbe a question? So the Rebbe says, the Rebbe de Shver hat dich geschickt zu mir. The Friedrich Rebbe sent you to me. I have to answer all your questions. He says, listen, this question doesn't really bother me. But I live in a Satmar Kila in Toronto. And they're very bothered by this whole thing in Lubavitch with Makar of the Freie Yidden. Also, listakel b'fnei Rasha, you now look at the face of a Rasha, Marilyn. So the Rebbe gets excited, the Rebbe gets emotional. And he says to him in Yiddish, if your neighbor the Kanoi, your neighbor the Zealot, so the Rebbe knew that it was his neighbor who was complaining to him, would have one of his children going off the derech, would he say that you're not allowed to look into the face of a Rasha? Or would he say, Mibsorcha al tasalam, do not neglect your own flesh? And the Rebbe said, By the Friedrich Rebbe, every Jew is his own flesh and blood. And so the Rebbe answered him. Then the Rebbe says, when two Yidden meet, you have to say Dvar Teire. And the Rebbe says to him for the third time, why do we make such a big deal out of the 5th Lichtale? And the answer is because the 5th Lichtale Chanukah can never be on Shabbos. And it's a hint of the greatest darkness. And that the koyach of the Chanukah Licht can take a Yid that bring his deepest darkness and bring back to Nebishtin. And this time the Rebbe said whether you live in Toronto or in London. And he leaves. 10 years pass. Which means you're talking now 50 years since the Rebbe's wedding. He's going to London for a chasana. And his neighbor, who is always complaining to Lubavitch Bakaya Freie, pulls him aside and says, listen, I have a very uncomfortable request. I'm embarrassed, but I have to do this. I have a daughter living in London with a goy. And she's about to marry him. I know you have connections to Lubavitch. If you can help me find my daughter, I don't know where she is. Anyway, he goes to London, and he tracks down the Rebbe had a shliach. He was a shliach to the whole of Europe. Oh, what was his name? He was a Scottish fellow. He was a businessman. He was a very interesting Yid. He didn't have a place to shlichus. He just did the Rebbe's things all over Europe. He was a rich man. He traveled a lot. The Rebbe sent him all these private shlichus. I forgot to remember his name. He was a big chevra man. Anyway, he found this guy. And he said to him the story that I'm looking for a girl. I don't even know where she is. He says, okay, I'll see what I can do. And he started to make inquiries. I don't know how you look for a Jewish girl in London living with a goy. This guy stayed in London for a couple of weeks. He gets a phone call from him one night. He says, come to my house now. So he comes to this Yid's house, and the girl is sitting on the couch, very emotional. He tracked her down, and he encouraged her to go back to her family. And there's 5 candles burning on the menorah. That's the story. Now wait, I forgot to tell you something important. When he went into the Rebbe in 1969, the Rebbe gave him a bracha that he should be by the chasana of his son's son, of his grandson. To give a survivor such a bracha, that should be by the chasana of an einikel. Anyway, he came to dollars when his grandson was getting married, and he somehow managed to tell the Rebbe the story in a few minutes, in a few seconds, and the Rebbe said to him, the Rebbe de Shved, Yahat Avait Cook. The Frierdiker Rebbe could see far into the future. He passed away right after Sheva Berachos of his first Einikel. The Rebbe promised him. That's the story, and I choose to believe it. But anyway, this is the beginning of the story. Was that Menachem Zembe, Rebbe Menachem Zembe was a big Gaon, was invited to the Rebbe's Chasana. Now, what I want to talk to you about, and I'm sorry I'm left with so little time, because we talked about other things, including a very little bit. I'm sorry.
It's a good story.
It's an incredible story, but it's a Hanukkah story. It's not a Rebbe Chasana story. Now, on Hanukkah, I'm not going to have what to tell you. Is this. I want to share with you. So when the Rebbe got married, they got married on a Tuesday night. I believe that before Shabbos they went back to Riga. In other words, they didn't make all the Sheva Brachas in Poland. They made several Sheva Brachas in Varsha. Then the Frierdiker, the whole family back to Riga. The end of the Sheva Brachas, the Shabbos of Sheva Brachas was again in Riga. The plan was that the Rebbe would stay in Riga, but the Latvian government would not have it. So by Shvat or Od, the Rebbe and the Rebbe's were first to move back to Berlin. And of course, you know the story, you've heard it 1,000 times. From that moment on, the Rebbetzin lived together with her husband in a godforsaken country, all by herself, in a studio apartment. People walked into the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin apartment, they didn't have a bedroom. For 12 years, they lived in the Rebbe was, the Frierdiker was supporting them. When the Rebbe was in school and the Rebbetzin was in school, the Frierdiker was supporting them. They said they lived on a shoestring budget. They lived on very, very little bit of money. And apparently, and they lived very, very simply for all those years, separated from Chassidim, away from the Rebbe, until, of course, the Rebbe would move to New York in Tov Shin Aleph in 1941. And that's a story unto itself. We'll talk about that at a different time. The story that so they stayed at Shtikel Zeit. There were things that happened in the days and weeks after the Rebbe. L'moshel, the Rebbe in his Rishimis, in his own journal, copies over, word for word, the Yuman that somebody wrote of his wedding. One of the Hasidim, Shmuel Zalman, wrote a summary of what happened by the Rebbe's Chasana. Our Rebbe took his page and copied into his own journal, word for word, and then they printed it. You can see how the Rebbe is copying what someone described about his own Chasana, because it was describing the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe copied it verbatim into his journal, and now they printed it. Also, Achei Temimim, the first entry of the Rebbe's journal is Achei Temimim. Tafresh Beitas, and it says, Nechnasti al pi akriya, the Frierdiker Rebbe called me into his room, and he gave me regards to my brother from Label, because they had a dream in which they saw the Rebbe Rashab and Label Ganze Maise. The part of the story that I want to repeat, I told it to the girls in the other room already, is that the Frierdiker Rebbe had not worn a shtreimel from the day he became a Rebbe. Because there was a hirah for the Rebbe Maharash, that a shtreimel you wear only in Lubavitch. The first time the Frierdiker Rebbe put on a shtreimel as a Rebbe ever was by our Rebbe's Chasana. And 3 weeks later, his father came to him in a dream, the Rebbe Rashab, and he said to him, "Adayin Faran Hittel." He approved. Thank you for putting on Faran Hittel. Thank you for putting on that. Adayin Faran Hittel. It's in the Neshibas. It's printed. Thank you for putting on the shtreimel. And of course, from that point forward, the Frierdiker Rebbe wore shtreimel, Shabbos and Yom Tov also. But the story that I want to tell you about is the story of the Rebbe's parents. The Rebbe's parents, you don't need me to tell you that the Rebbe's parents loved the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin very much. It was heartbreaking to them that they were not able to participate in the wedding. They kept on delaying the wedding. The Rebbe was already out of Russia 14 months by the time he got married. The wedding was delayed a lot for 3 different reasons, which I explained to the girls in the other room. There was no money to make a wedding. They were hoping that Rebbe's parents would be able to attend. And there was also some differences of opinion about the wedding. But the Rebbe's parents tried very hard to get a visa from the Russian government, just an exit visa, just to go for a visit and come back, to participate in the chasna of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and the Tsarist government, the Soviet government, the communist government, would not give him permission. So what did the Rebbe's parents do? They made a wedding without a chasna kala. If you know the history, when they moved to Yekatinusla, they took a very, very large apartment, a gigantic apartment, many rooms. The Rebbetzins said that she wanted every one of her boys to have her own room, his own room, so they could do their own thing undisturbed. When the Soviets took over, they cut their apartment in half, and they made it to 2 families. So the larger apartment became a small apartment. The people who lived in the other half of the apartment were Poshet Goyim. But they respected them, they liked them. So when they heard that they're planning to make an event for the Chasana, they moved out of the apartment, they took down the wall, and they gave the Rebbe's parents access to their original apartment, where the Rebbe's bar mitzvah took place. It was a very large apartment. And I think they invited 300 guests to the house, to their apartment. And they made a wedding without a chas and kala. They had a feast. The Machon, maybe Machon Dvorkin was at the chas, and he played the fiddle. And Zalman, there was a chassid by the name of Rabbi Zalman Valenkin. I don't know if you've ever heard of Zalman Valenkin. Rabbi Zalman Valenkin was the Rebbe's Melamed. He was the Rebbe's teacher as a child. And he stood up on the table and he danced and he sang and said, I had the schus to be the Melamed of the son-in-law of the Rebbe. And of course later on he had the schus to be the Melamed of the Rebbe himself. Rabbi Zalman Valenkin was in Yekaterinburg. It was called then the Rebbe Petrovsk, when the Rebbe's parents made this chasana, and he participated in the chasana with great simcha. And again, I believe the Machon Dvorkin was there also, and he played on the violin with the fiddle. And they mamish made a chasana, it was a big celebration. The next day, the Rebbe and the Rebbe's parents, the Rebbe Zechana and the Rebbe Leivik, made a party for the children. They brought in all the kids. There's an old Russian man who tells the story of that afternoon. They invited all the children, and they gave them all candies and sweets. And the Rebbe Leivik and the Rebbe Zechana together fabrenged with the children in participation as a part of the solidarity for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins chasna, which took place hundreds of miles away. And he tells a very, very interesting story. It's such an interesting story. I don't know how many kids were there, but there weren't 500 kids. 24 kids. How many children were there that were going to sit in the house of a Rav in 1929 in Soviet Russia? They said to the kid, it was dangerous to be anywhere. Huh? This old man was one of those children. He was there. They said to the children that every child has a talent. There's no such thing as a child without a talent. One can draw, one can sing, one can play, one can dance. And every one of the children should display their talent. It's such an interesting piece of chinuch. The Rebbe's parents, every child should say what he's special at, and he should get a chance to do that thing. And the Rebbetzin said, who can sing? This old man says that the Rebbetzin Chana was so musical. I mean, he was a child, so I don't know what kind of havana he had, but the Rebbetzin Chana was so musical, it's like her whole body was music. And who could sing? And everyone was very shy. He says, I'll sing. And he got up and he sang a song. And 60 years later, literally 60 years later, or even maybe 70 years later, he was a very, very old man, and he told the story. He calls them Levik, not Levik. He was a kid in Yekaterinburg. He participated in the fabrengen that the Rebbe's parents made for the Rebbe's chasana. And then there are the letters. The letters that Rebbe Leivik wrote to the Rebbe surrounding the chasana are unbelievably poignant. On the one hand, you see how serious this is. Rebbe Leivik understood that this is the future of the world. Rebbe Leivik knew that the Rebbe is a Rebbe. Rebbe Leivik knew as a child that the Rebbe is going to be a Rebbe. And the Rebbe Leivik understood that this shidduch, this marriage is nish stam azoi. This is a marriage that's going to be, like the Rebbe says, binyan adeyat. The effects of this marriage are safe kodesh. Rebbe Leivik understood how important the Rebbe's chasana was because of who the Rebbe was. Rebbe Leivik had a good idea of who his son was and who his son was destined to be. And you feel that in those letters. He talks about his holy grandparents, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the koiches that come from the Heilige Zedis, and so on and so forth. And you see that aspect of it. And he gives the brachas. Rebbe Zechana said that Rebbe Leivik wrote a telegram of 105 words. That's a big telegram. It begins with the word mima'amakim, or mima'amaki. He later sent the Rebbe the original. So in the Rebbe's collection of letters, you have that telegram in the Ksaviyat Kedesh of Rebbe Leivik. But he sent it to him a telegram that he should arrive on the day of the Chasana. And the Rebbetzin Chana said that when her husband finished writing that telegram, 105 words, the table was covered with tears. The neshama came out. And Rebbe Leivik wrote this telegram to the Rebbe. The Rebbe obviously got the telegram in transliteration into Poland, but later on the Rebbe Levi sent to the original. On the other hand, you see love. It's amazing. The Rebbe Levi's love is so gushing. It's so mushy. It's like a bubbe. My father doesn't speak the way Rebbe Levi spoke. And I don't speak that way. The love that he displays in this letter, the amount of ahava that he shows to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins, this emotional love, fatherly love, paternal love, maternal love. It's very, very human. It's remarkably human. And he just showers them with brachas. And he gives the Rebbe certain instructions. He says, I wish if I would be at the wedding, I would give you the gartel that I have from the Tzemach Tzedek. You should be able to wear it to the chuppah. Later on, the Rebbe got that gartel. The Rebbe Zechana took with her from Russia, and so forth. And he also gives him a how we should behave the day of the wedding. He says to him that from the day of your chasana, you should wear a gartel and a hat. Anytime you say Berchas HaShacher and you daven or you bench. And by the way, not all of the heroes that Rebbe Levi gave the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe had the same minhagim. And Bepashtas, when the Rebbe had a conflict in the minute that his father told him, and the minyan that he got from the Rebbe de Shver, Bepashtas he did like the Frierdiker Rebbe, although we can't know 100%. He told him for Shidden Heiros how we should behave before the Chasana, the day of the Chasana, after the Chasana. And of course, amongst the things that he sent the Rebbe, never saw him again. Never saw him again. He sent him a sum of money, or he told him to borrow money that he would pay it, a certain amount of money, a lot of money, and to buy for the Rebbetzin Chayamushka a piece of jewelry that's beautiful. But he uses words that denote that he was sensitive to how beautiful a piece of jewelry has to be for a girl or a woman. And then he finishes by saying, Vernitzen das Gesundheit, use it well and enjoy it. So warm, so human, so paternal. And you see this in the Rebbe's father's letters, a lot of love, a lot of warmth. And of course this continues throughout. Over the next decade they would correspond. And every year for the Rebbe's wedding anniversary, the Rebbe's father would write them a beautiful letter. So the letter, 90% of it is Kabbalah, code, but the beginning and the end is human. He's writing to the two of them, very warm brachas. And Rebbe Levi keeps on blessing them for children. For children. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in the first year or two, gives them brachas for children, and then he stops. Rebbe Levi is blessing them that they should have children. Rebbe Levi knew, a big Kabbalah, apparently, that they were not going to have children, but in all of the letters he's giving them brachas for children. There's always a letter for Yud Aleph Nissen. There's always a letter for Yud Aleph Kislev. The Rebbe's father's letters that he wrote to the Rebbe that are very, very warm, very special. There's a letter from Rebbe Levi to the Rebbe Achei Temimim, where he writes to her, I'm asking you to write me and keep me informed of how you're doing. Don't look at me as a removed father-in-law, but as a loving father. Please write to me like a daughter. Keep no secrets from me. Don't be embarrassed. Tell me exactly what's in your heart. The Rebbe's father writes to the Rebbetzin that she should write honestly to them, to the two of them. There's actually one letter that they found, I don't know how. They found a letter that the Rebbe Chayamushka wrote to the Rebbetzin Chana, and they published it in 1938, 10 years after the wedding, where the Rebbe Chayamushka writes to her shviger, to her mother-in-law, that the Rebbe finished school, and he applied for French citizenship, and they're thinking to take an apartment with a bedroom. The first days, for 10 years, they lived in a studio apartment. Now they actually take an apartment with a bedroom. So the wedding gifts that they got by their chasana, they never had. The dishes, the china, the dishes that were given as wedding gifts, they had no place to keep it. So they were with the family in Poland, and when the Rebbe took an apartment with a bedroom, because he was paying his own rent, he took a job apparently, so they sent them their wedding gifts. They should have the dishes, and for 10 years they didn't have access to them. So she writes to her mother-in-law, my sister already took an apartment, Chandel, they lived in Paris together. But I have a very hard time making up my mind. I want to find a certain apartment, there's to be a certain... She describes what she needed to be satisfied with the apartment. She's having a very difficult time. The Rebbe Achei Temimim sort of suggests that she's a little bit indecisive about how she wants everything to be perfect. It's a letter she wrote to the Rebbe's mother, which is now available. I mean, if I know about it, it's not a secret, because I don't have access to secret stacks. But there's a story that I need to tell you. And this story, I think, is compelling. I know it's compelling. It's powerful. I am telling you about a letter which has to be the fourth letter in a sequence. But the first three letters we don't have. You can only deduce from this fourth letter what the first three letters were about. Okay, understand. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got married in November, right? In Kislev, November, beginning of December, right? Whatever time it was, right? Yeah? In order which is how many months later? Tevis, Shvat, Adar. 3-4 months later, you already have the 4th letter in the sequence, which means that in the course of 4 months, 3 letters had been sent, and we don't have those 3 letters. We have only the 4th letter. But from the 4th letter, here's what you deduce. The Rebbe Achei Mushka married the Rebbe, right? And what did you discover? That he's not just a genius, he's also a tzaddik. Right? He was very, very intelligent, she knew that. The Rebbe never ate. The Rebbe fasted every single day till mincha. The Rebbe fasted every single day mincha, which means he didn't eat or drink till mincha. Every single day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the Rebbe fasted half a day, every single day, till mincha. Now the Rebbetzins always felt, like her mother had felt before her, that she has to look after her husband. You know, what does a woman do? Amongst other things, she takes care of her husband. And she says to her husband, excuse me, mister, we're husband and wife, you got to eat in the morning. And I'm sure the Rebbe didn't tell her no, but the Rebbe in his very, very, very gentlemanly way said, it's not happening, you know. The Rebbe doesn't have to say things stubbornly to be stubborn. She figured out quite early that her husband doesn't eat. Her husband doesn't sleep. A few other delectable things about her husband. I would imagine she understood she wasn't marrying a boy off the street, but nevertheless, the Rebbetzin marries the Rebbe, and she finds out that his precious is not normal. The degree of his holiness, his hanhagis was so oizgerech, the way he ate, the way he slept, the way he interacted, like a big tzaddik. I mean, the Rebbe, I have to tell you, the Rebbe is a big tzaddik, and it's not like the Rebbetzin Achei Mushka didn't know how that looks. Her father was a big tzaddik, her grandfather was a tzaddik, but now she's married to one. So she wrote to Rebbe Leivik a letter complaining. She wrote to the Rebbe's father complaining that the Rebbe doesn't eat. Now, we don't have that letter, but I can only imagine that what she wrote is, I'm his husband, I'm his wife. It's my responsibility. I have to look after his health, and that's nicht. So Rebbe Leivik, and this I connected to that other letter where he wrote to the Rebbe Achei Mushka that she shouldn't write like a daughter-in-law, she should write like a loving daughter. She told the Rebbe's father the truth. So Rebbe Leivik writes a letter to the Rebbe, which we also don't have, or at least it's not been published. I got a letter from your wife, that every day you fast till mincha. I don't know where you got this from, you got to stop. So there's a third letter that Rebbe writes back to his father. Now again, I'm deducing. You know what the word deducing means? I'm deciding what it means based on the letter that we have. The Rebbe said to his father, she had no right to tell you. She's my wife, she has to protect my privacy, she had no right to tell you. And I want you to know there is the same exact story 5 generations before with a very, very scary component to it. The Rebbetzin Achei Mushka and the Tzemach Tzedek had the same problem. Where the Tzemach Tzedek said to her, you had no right to do this, I'm your husband, you have to respect me first. She says, but the Zayda had gehesen. The Zayda said, the Alter Rebbe was your Zayda too. And he says, my honor had before him. The Rebbe wrote to his father, she had no right to tell you. So the Rebbe's father writes a 4th letter. And this is the letter we have. I'm happy that she told me. And I told her that in the future, if you play such games, you should reform me. Punkt all your chassidische shtick, your mishegassen. And the Rebbe writes, the Rebbe's father writes him, I never heard of such a hanhoga, to fast every single day till mincha. And in that letter it says, Kimdumani she'adayin lo higia ligvoros Shimshon. I believe you have not yet become as strong as Shimshon Agiber, you need to eat. They married 3.5 months. They had already Shalom Bayis issues. You understand? They had familial, Shalom Bayis issues. The Rebbe asked nicht, the Rebbe schlaf nicht. The Rebbe's Achei Mushka had to get used to these things. And, you know, never changed. The Rebbe should change. I mean, the Rebbe did what he wanted. The Rebbe did what he wanted. When the Rebbe got older, he changed. The Rebbe was elderly. The Rebbe listened to his doctors. The Rebbe, Dr. Weiss says, even though we asked him for praying for an hour, he was praying for 4, but he listened to us. The Rebbe listened to the doctors, but this was when he was 77. When the Rebbe was young, the Rebbe's Achei Mushka said, there's 2 things you have to know about my husband, and she was his wife. Number 1, you can never tell him to do things, you can only make a suggestion. Number 2, you get 1 shot. So pick your moment, because once you make the suggestion, if you asked at the wrong time, you can't even suggest it again.
Wait, so you knew what this letter said?
Huh? The letter, I told you what the letter said. That he wrote to him, no, you're wrong. I'm happy she told me. That's how I deduced that the Rebbe had written to her father, to his father, that she had right to tell him. I'm happy that she told me, and I hope in the future she'll tell me more when you do these kinds of things. This business of fasting a half a day every day, there's no such seder. I don't know where you took this from. And he writes, I believe you have not yet become a strong human being. The Rebbe is precious. The Rebbe is, I don't know if you understand what precious means. It's not stam frum. The Rebbe is removed from Gashmis. The holiness was on an extreme level. And the Rebbe Achei Temimim worried about him. The man didn't eat, the man didn't sleep. You know, when the Rebbe had his heart attack, he slept for 4 hours. And the Rebbetzins said, I'm married to him 50 years, I never saw him sleep so much. 4 hours! For some people, that's a Shabbos afternoon nap. Machon. I've never... A short nap, yeah. An interrupted nap. Yeah. The Rebbe said, I never saw him. They're married 50 years. The Rebbe... And she had to take... She felt it was her job. When the Rebbe became a Rebbe, she told Chassidim, I will take care of the Rebbe. I will look after him. And the but I'll tell you a different time. And the Rebbe discovered that the Rebbe's life is so beating up on himself. She worried about his health, Pashat. She worried about his health. And the Rebbe, I heard people describe their conversations, you know. The Rebbe would say something, and the Rebbe would answer. They never argued. But if the Rebbe wanted to listen, he listened. If he didn't want to listen, he didn't listen. And she understood that. You know, you don't argue. With this man, you say it twice, it's not going to help. Say it 100 times. If he's not doing it, he's not doing it. This is his wife. Anyway, but there's one more piece to this story. The rest of it, what I just told you, is very interesting. The rest of it is just sort of the end of the story. The Rebbe fasted a lot. It's a Davar Yadua. But one of the things about the Rebbe was he didn't want anybody to know he's fasting. So there's two stories that are well known. One of them was, this story, I believe it happened with Rabbi Chadakov, who would later be the Rebbe's secretary. It happened in the early 30s. The Rebbe was visiting the Friedrich Rebbe in Riga, Latvia, where Rabbi Chadakov lived. And they were talking. Rabbi Chadakov fell in love with the Rebbe. People say that Rabbi Chadakov was the chassid of this Rebbe before he was the chassid of the Friedrich Rebbe's. He absolutely adored the Rebbe. He saw the Rebbe as a young man. They were about the same age. Rabbi Chadakov was a little bit older than the Rebbe. He said he saw the Rebbe say V'yiten Lecha, and blew his mind. He knew that how big a Gaon the Rebbe is. The Rebbe is standing, holding a siddur, saying V'yiten Lecha like a Pashat Yid. The way he saw the Rebbe say V'yiten Lecha, that's what took him. He was a chassid of the Rebbe in the early 30s yet. So it was after Ma'ariv, and he was talking to the Rebbe. Now, how's he supposed to know the Rebbe is fasting that day? The Rebbe fasted all the time. And of course, the Rebbe wasn't going to say, excuse me, I haven't eaten anything, can I go get a cup of tea? The Rebbe talked to him. He's talking, and when the door opens to the Beis Medrash, and Chadakov is watching this, and the Rebbetzin appears in the doorway. And you know how the Shneersons operate. They're very circumspect. They never tell you straight. They have to figure things. They're very, very respectable and respectful people. You have to speak nuance. If you don't understand nuance, you can't have a relationship with them. She doesn't say a word. She stands in the doorway. And the Rebbe knows why she's standing in the doorway. Anyway, she stands, and she stands, and she stands, and she stands. And the Rebbe's talking, and she's talking, and she's talking. Chadakov doesn't know what the meaning of this is. After a long time, she goes away, comes back with reinforcements. She's bringing back her sister and her mother. And the four of them are standing in the doorway. And they're standing, and Chadakov's talking to the Rebbe. The Rebbe knows exactly what they want. And the Rebbetzin is upset that the Rebbe's not taking care of his health. The Rebbetzin Chamadina was a shviger. She walks over to the Rebbe, and she was deaf to start with. She always spoke very loud. Even when she talked regular, she had a very high voice because she didn't know how she sounded. And she starts shouting at the Rebbe, Vifo the Shir fast. It's after Ma'ariv. Go eat now. You fasted a whole day. Now eat. The only reason Chadakov knew the story is because the Rebbe Chamadina disclosed it. The Rebbe would not allow anybody to know he's fasting. There's a second story that happened many years later in Tafshin Zai, 1947. Reb Zalman Butman. The Rebbe came to France to pick up his mother. He stayed in the house, or his mother stayed in the house of Reb Zalman Schneerson. Reb Zalman Schneerson was not here. Reb Zalman Schneerson was in America. His brother, Reb Zalman Butman, hosted the Rebbe's mother. And it was a farbrengen of some sort. And the Rebbe sat and he refused to eat. And they offered him water, they offered him tea, they offered him a fruit, that's nicht. So Zalman Butman, without realizing the significance of this, says to the Rebbe, you're fasting? So the Rebbe's response was, says Nikir, you can see. That was the only concern, that you shouldn't be able to see the days fast. You could see, the Rebbe was marbe b'tanesim. It's a known fact. The Rebbe fasted a lot. Younger hate zicher. And even as the Rebbe was marbe b'tanesim, fasted an awful lot. And they had this relationship, the Rebbetzin, where the Rebbetzin took care of him, but she took care of him in his nusach. She took care of him the way he allowed her to take care of him, which means she didn't stop the fasting and all the other hanogas, Chaim Baruch Abba told me a story, just finish a word. The Rebbe had a pair of shoes which he wore for like 18 years. You know that story with the shoes? The Rebbe wore the same pair of shoes until the beginning of Tafshin Nun. And the shoes were tattered. There was nothing left of the shoes. And people said the reason the Rebbe is wearing torn shoes is because his feet hurt him. If he's going to put on new shoes, he's going to have to break them in, so he's wearing torn shoes. Anyway, one day in Tafshin Nun, out of the blue, the Rebbe got new shoes. And the left shoe, the old one, the back was pressed down like a slipper. Also, they're wearing new shoes. I remember the new shoes. They all went to look at the shoes. And they was wearing, his feet don't hurt. 17, 18 years, they were the same shoes. They found out later that the whole thing that the Rebbe Rashab said, that defeating the communists has to do with the Rebbe for the Sheikh. When the Rebbe put on the new shoes, it was about the same time that communists... There's a story that goes back 70 or 80 years where the Rebbe Rashab said, Amol kumna yunga mai mitziris neshich uvetzi aravar. There's something mystical about these shoes. But the Rebbe wore the same pair of shoes for 18 years, a very long time. So I heard different parts of the story from different people. One I heard from the Groner's nephew. Every time the Rebbe came from the oil, every time, he asked, the Zelbashich, same shoes, you didn't touch my shoes? They had to polish the shoes. There was nothing to polish. You polished shoe, the shoe came away. There was nothing left. So Chaim Baruch was close to the Rebbe Chaim Mushkin. So he said to me, he told the Rebbe was wearing the same shoes forever. At that point, it was probably 4 years. It wasn't 18 years. So the Rebbetzin says, when the Rebbe goes to the oil, take the shoes to the shoemaker and ask him for a very, very soft piece of leather and put them on the inside. Don't put them on the outside, put them on the inside so the shoes should stay together. So Chaim Baruch comes to 770 and he's taking the shoes. And Label says, where are you taking the shoes? And the Label was the one who got the brunt. Every single time, Label was Rabbi Groner, every single time the Rebbe came from the oil, he has the Zalbashich. So Chaim Baruch says, the Rebbetzin said, so Label Groner says, listen, I'm not getting involved with you and the Rebbetzin, but I'm telling you, you're playing with fire. So he got hesitant. And he went back to the Rebbetzin, and he told the Rebbetzin what Rabbi Groner said. And the Rebbetzin said, it's a pity you didn't listen to me, but now you can't touch the shoes, and that's the way the shoes stay. She was his wife. This is the kind of yachas they had. This is the kind of relationship they had. Okay, I'll see you all on Thursday.